Hi, and welcome to a 2022 astrology forecast. I'm Drew Levanti, and I'm being joined by my friend and astrological colleague, Héloïse. Hi, Héloïse.
Hi, how are you, Drew?
I'm doing awesome. I'm so excited that you're joining me here. I've been basking in some Venus and Sagittarius magic that I did recently, and you have been a wonderful connection through that. My friend from a foreign land.
I am indeed. Well, it's been really refreshing to talk to you too, since we both have a background in anthropology, which we studied as a bachelor's degree. And I started my astro practice officially last summer, though I've been doing astrology for longer. And yeah, I'm really excited to do this forecast with you of the year ahead, since we both like, especially electional astrology, and we're like, peeking through charts through the months ahead. So I think it's really cool.
Yeah, totally. And in terms of us both having a background in anthropology, I always joke that the reason that I started studying anthropology is because I thought it would allow me to study everything. And then I finished school and I needed something else to fill that role. And so astrology has done that for me, because it is this lens for looking at everything. And so, as we go through the year of 2022, we definitely want to keep in mind that we are doing astrology and we're using these symbols to make predictions, but that also, involves our understanding of the world outside of astrology. So as you forecast and project your consciousness forward into the year ahead, try to notice what are the assumptions that you're sort of building into your interpretations, or when you listen to us, what resonates with you. What's the existing worldview that you're sort of bringing into this? And I think that sort of interaction between what we know to be true in our sort of concrete, tangible experience, alongside our sort of symbolic understanding of things with astrology, where do those two meet? I think is going to be a really interesting place to look. And in terms of, being electional astrologers, both Héloïse and I are electional astrologers. We do all the astrology, but electional is maybe our choice if we had to pick. And so what we're going to be doing with the approach for the year ahead here is we've selected one chart from each month, one complete chart with a rising sign and everything. And we're using that not necessarily as an election per se. We're not going to be recommending all of these, although some of them are good.
Don't do this at home, kids.
Yeah, don't do this at home, seriously. But instead, what we're going to do is just use those charts as sort of, what was the word you used, Elo?
I would say a peek into the energy, the atmosphere of each month, as in, so the goal of electional astrology, for people who wouldn't be familiar with it, is that you want to pick the best, the most so-called auspicious moment in time to start anything. And the premise is that based on the position of the planets and the aspects they make, etc., you can have an idea or sort of influence the outcome of that venture. And so usually what we do in our practice is try and find the best moment, the moment where the planets are in the best possible configuration, with it a certain time window for you to do. It can be anything, the standard examples are to go on a trip or start a business or get married, that kind of things. And so it rests on the principle that we can look at the sky and find meaning through symbols that we interpret. And so I find it quite interesting because, first of all, I think as an electional astrologer, you quickly figure out that it's not really about choosing the best moment, really. It's about choosing the most okay moment, especially at short notice. It's like damage control, I would say. And I think that some charts, that I wouldn't pick for my clients personally, are still extremely eloquent, as we will see, for not necessarily the best outcome, but interesting outcomes, to see what can happen
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, a couple things about that. First of all, this idea of like the best chart versus like an interesting chart. I think also like when you're in the flow of electing for yourself, which is something that I really want to help people do. When you're in the flow of electing for yourself, you're right that there's limitations, right? Like especially if you're electing for yourself every day, you notice how things change day after day. And within that context, you see that a lot of times it's not that you're choosing a chart that is the best one, but rather you're choosing a chart that actually reflects what's going on. It's realistic. And so I'm really interested in this sort of like realistic electional astrology, which is sort of similar to horary in a way, you know, in the sense that when you pull a horary, you're looking at a chart that describes the situation at hand. It doesn't necessarily describe a good outcome because you're asking the chart, you're asking the horary to see what the outcome is, or to sort of describe the situation and give you this lens for interpreting the situation and situating your agency within that situation. And so that kind of realistic perspective is something that I really like about electional. And it's an approach that I want to sort of continue to develop. And then in terms of, there was something else, like these charts. Yeah. So these charts are not like not all of them are charts that you would necessarily want to use, but they are charts that will be used, like whether or not people mean to. These are all charts that will begin some things. And so maybe there's a way in which we can look at these charts as, you know, inceptional moments on their own that give us a sense of the sorts of happenings which will occur during this longer span of time. Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
I would also say that it's good if you're trying to, learn astrology, especially electional astrology, because you're going to get a sense of, we always provide context, but you're always going to get a sense of what that planet in that configuration and that sign means. For example, Jupiter for a good first half of the year is going to be in the sign of Pisces, which we're going to discuss a lot before moving into Aries. And so we're going to see a lot of charts with that configuration, and I find it really interesting to explore its meanings and see what kind of general atmosphere transcribes. For example, I think it's a very interesting actually new year, like beginning of the year right now, because as some of you may know, Jupiter actually moved into Pisces on December 29th, 2021. So just a couple of days ago from when we're filming this. And I personally can feel that the atmosphere is quite different. I would say that I find people to be more cautiously optimistic than they were. But it's an energy that we're slowly moving towards. I feel like people have been in the last few days speaking a lot about new ways, new paths we can build together. And it's interesting because I feel like astrology, and especially astrology of the moment, talks a lot about what current headspace we're in versus what time will bring and where we will find ourselves. As in, things are probably going to feel very different from in July than in January, and you don't need to be an astrologer to know that. But as an astrologer, you have this sort of perspective to be like, well, things are going to be very different from what they're like now. How can I, what am I going to do with this? You know, it doesn't have to be the best possible moment. It doesn't have to be, you know, but nobody says that we have to act or do things under the best possible moments. Like, hello, Mars.
I mean, I think that like prediction is, you know, really the heart of astrology. This is an idea that was presented by Geoffrey Cornelius in his really canonical astrological work from a couple decades ago, The Moment of Astrology, which is this idea, which presents this idea that all astrology is prediction. And as we look at a chart, we are always essentially predicting. And I think that even in a natal context, like you're using these symbols to make predictions about the future of the person's life, but it's also a prediction even if it's about the past. Like the astrologer doesn't know, and so in a way they are predicting, regardless of whether it's past, present, future, whatever. The whole interpretive mechanism of astrology is based on prediction. And so when we're looking at any chart, like the chart of today even, I think that what we're essentially doing is we're trying to understand our present. Like we're trying to understand what are the forces in our environment that are constraining or liberating our actions. What are the conditions that we are interfacing with? And that act of prediction, that act of trying to understand, is actually so important for life, like for living a life. Because without a sense of the future, there's no ability to believe in what we're doing, right? Like I think it's necessary to have this predictive view in order for our current actions and what we decide to do morally, ethically, politically, for those things to be resonant and to feel like we should continue to do them. And I think that a lot of what you're describing with the Jupiter and Pisces, and like people sort of this cautious optimism that you're citing, I think that that's really astute, because we do have this strong Jupiter signature, which we could describe as like some kind of optimism or forward-looking energy, people being on the same page, people believing in collective projects. These are all Jupiterian things. Jupiter rejoices in the 11th house of community. And then on the other hand, we have this really strong Saturn, which is like it's restrictive, and there are certain ways in which Saturn can often feel like it forecloses certain futures, and it keeps certain things from happening. And this is what I want to get into in terms of talking about the Saturn-Uranus square, which I think maybe takes us to our first chart. Looking at this chart from January, which is so interesting, and I think does give us a view. Oh, that's March. It does give us a view into some of what's going on in terms of this extremely strong Jupiter. So we have this Pisces rising chart with Jupiter newly into Pisces, conjunct the ascendant. And then we have this Sagittarius moon in the 10th house and in an applying aspect with Jupiter. So this is one of those charts that, for January, this is a good chart, even though maybe in the context of like a larger period of time, we wouldn't want to use this one. But the point of this chart and why we've chosen to look at this one is because it does have this strong Jupiter, and it does have the strong Uranus conjunct the sun, and the square between Saturn and Uranus, which is still pretty tight. So this is sort of the landscape that we're dealing with at the beginning of the year, where Capricorn is very emphasized with 3 planets in Capricorn, including 2 retrograde planets. And then
I love that.
Yeah. So Saturn is super important because it has all this responsibility for the Capricorn planets while it's squaring Uranus. And then Jupiter is newly into Pisces. And so I agree with you about this kind of cautious optimism because of that presence of both Jupiter and Saturn in their own signs.
I find it very interesting because this presence, of a lot of Saturn ruled planets are gonna still be a theme for the next coming months versus this Jupiter in Pisces. I've seen a lot of astrologers kind of be like, well, talk about the whole Saturnian themes and then be like, yeah, and there's Jupiter. Because everyone is actually excited about this Pisces Jupiter, but then because Jupiter is averse to Saturn, meaning that it doesn't make any aspect. So Jupiter and Saturn literally can't see each other. It's powerful forces because they're both in their own domiciles, but they can't see each other. And so I find this theme quite interesting because we're coming out of 2 years of strong Saturn rulership. Saturn was like the final dispositor of a lot of planets, of configurations in these last 2 years. And so to me, this Jupiter theme kind of feels like we've been repeatedly running into walls for the last 2 years, in such big restrictions, and all of a sudden it's kind of like you turn around and there's a friend who's there and you're like, oh, I didn't see you there, hi.
Yeah.
Or like a friend who was stuck behind the wall and all of a sudden they're like, hey.
Yeah.
And I really like this energy, and I definitely feel good about what's been happening, because as you said, as Jupiter rejoices in the 11th house, I think yeah, Lily gives, he says, hopes and dreams to the 11th house, and it's so fitting for Jupiter, especially with the co-presence with Neptune. As we're going to see, there's a lot of talks about things being realistic or not, but with Jupiter, there's definitely, the hope is definitely there, and to me it feels like a hope that wasn't there before, and we don't quite know how to get there yet, but it's starting to show up. And I really like, especially in this year, I mean, Mercury and Venus both being retrograde is something that we're going to talk about, but let me say, I love a Capricorn Mars. I really do.
Yeah, I know you do.
Being a person with a extremely dignified Mars as my chart ruler, I do love, some action. Like 2 years ago, if some of you remember the months of, I think it was late December and January, early February 2020, before everything hit, Mars was in Capricorn. It was definitely one of the busiest times of my life. I mean, I didn't have any time to rest. I was running around everywhere.
Yeah.
So this sort of like Venus Mars co-presence in Capricorn it makes me think of like everyone running everywhere before like a runway show or something, like,
it is chaotic, isn't it? Like Venus and Mercury retrograde, like we're really rushing to put this thing on.
Exactly. And I think it's like a lot of malfunctions and that kind of things, especially with the Sun and Saturn, these very rigid sort of energy coming together. And then I feel like Jupiter is kind of here to lighten the mood a little bit, which I like.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that it's a really important point that you made about, Jupiter having recently been in Saturn signs. So like from 2020 when it was in Capricorn and 2021 when it was in Aquarius. And one of the ways that I think that we can see that is that Jupiter has been helping Saturn do Saturn's job. So the creation of walls, the strengthening of walls, the making walls seem like a safe thing, like that walls are protective. Saturn naturally is conducive to isolation, like it promotes isolation and sort of hermeticism, or being a hermit, I guess is maybe the better way to say that when I have a bunch of people out there into magic. But with Jupiter leaving a Saturn sign, it's like those walls aren't going to seem as friendly anymore. Because Jupiter isn't there to make Saturn do Saturn's job in a more friendly way. So with as much as it's important that Jupiter is moving into Pisces in its own sign, it's also important that Saturn no longer has this sort of this softness to it. So I think with Saturnian issues, like with these things about restrictions, I think we're actually going to get more Uranus this year because Jupiter is not there to soften Saturn. And so I think there's going to be more like reactionary tendencies, more rebellion against structures, but also a sort of pressure on utopian thinking. Like if we think about Uranus as the future, or that which is just out of view, which we're trying to bring into being. So if we think about this Saturn-Uranus square with like the first invisible planet and the last visible planet, it is like our visible social structures and the future of those things, which is just out of view, but which we are trying to manifest. And so if we look at this square with Saturn being in the superior position, I think there is a way in which Saturn is blocking or co-opting certain utopian ways of thinking. So an example of this might be in terms of cryptocurrency or food innovation, or anything that has to do with Uranus and Taurus, like the transformation of economic systems and currency. I think all of those things are being dominated by Saturn at the moment. I think that in many ways, Saturn is foreclosing certain futures, and bringing, you know, for example, with central banks adopting cryptocurrency like trial programs, right? Like the established structures, which are Saturn things, are trying to integrate these Uranian disruptions in order to kind of preserve their themselves. I don't think that's ever entirely effective, but the power dynamic is clear because Saturn is in the superior position.
Just a heads up for people. So Saturn and Uranus as very slow planets have been forming a square on and off from each other. So a 90 degrees angle. And it's happened. There was an exact aspect like 3 times in 2021. And the last one was in December 24th. And what's interesting for this year, the year ahead, is that this sort of dynamic is going to happen again, but there's going to be no exact aspect because I think at some point, you know, they're heading towards each other in retrograde mode, and then one of them goes direct later in the year.
They do get very tight.
Yeah, like basically in the same degree, just not the same minutes. So that's interesting in and of itself, because I've been thinking about it. What you say is very true. It makes a lot of sense in terms of these reflections around restrictions. But this year kind of changes because I definitely feel like there's a bit more instability, which in a lot of cases it's good. To me, instability brings the potential for change. And so we sort of have a window opening here. It's like they're getting closer and closer and closer, but somehow it doesn't happen. And so with this sort of like Jupiter influence that's going to sort of come in and like lubricate social relations a bit more, I find that quite interesting in terms of what can we imagine. It makes me think of the role of Venus too, as we've been talking about money, because Uranus has been ruled by Venus, but Venus for like such a long time now has been like, first of all, not having the most fun, and also has been in Saturn ruled sign, so like on Saturn's side per se. And I'm curious about, I mean, you've mentioned cryptocurrencies. Like, I think what's really interesting that would link to Venus in that domain with like the blockchain technology and everything is NFTs. And it's been a very polarizing topic, and some people are saying, oh, it's a scam, and other people are like, no, and they can they're making a lot of money off of it. And
it's good for artists is one thing that comes up, right?
And it's bad for the environment, which are all such Venusian topics. And it makes so much sense with Uranus being in Taurus in the sign of Venus. And so I'm curious to see, you know, with it's going to be first a Venus journey and retrograde journey into Capricorn, and then getting with Mars. So maybe potentially things getting a bit more heated in that domain. And then Venus moving into Aquarius. So still a Saturn ruled sign, but it's sort of the sign of change and of you know, thinking, I hate this expression, but like outside the box. And that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, that works. That definitely works.
It does. PSA, I'm an Aquarius sun. I'm allowed to say that. And then, but I find that it's going to be so interesting when Venus moves into Pisces, moving towards Jupiter, and then Neptune as well, in terms of, I think we're going to see such different landscapes. And I really look forward to Venus being able to do like pure Venus stuff, even if it's unrealistic. It reminds me of I think in May 2020 we had a Venus Neptune square that I remember a lot, as in people getting their hopes up and then not happening.
Well, that was the last Venus retrograde. That was like, people started socializing again. in the midst of the
And
restrictions, and then they realized they couldn't.
there is this thing of Venus. I'm quite fascinated by Neptune because it's a word that people use for Neptune is deception. And I find interesting because this word in French translates to disappointment, deception. And so to me, they're very linked together.
Absolutely.
It's a deception that leads to a disappointment. But I think it's cool for the time being. I remember I still felt a sense of relief during May 2020 as the square was perfecting. It's not because it doesn't last forever that it's not good in the moment. And I think it's more about appreciating that. But that's not what we're doing during the Venus retrograde in Capricorn. We're going back over everything that fucked up. Taking a long, hard look at it.
So let's stay with that Venus retrograde in Capricorn for a moment. So what you're saying about Venus in terms of it ruling Uranus is some kind of reevaluate. Tell me if I'm right in what you're thinking. Some kind of reevaluation and working out the kinks, especially in terms of like who is this good for, or like what values are being upheld through, like, whether it's environmental values or the values of artists being able to make a living, or like these kinds of questions around Uranus and Taurus being connected, like being linked to the transit of Venus, whether it's retrograde in Capricorn or moving into Aquarius or then moving into Pisces. So I think what you're saying is that we can track these Uranian transformations in Taurus through Venus's transit through these next few signs, right?
Absolutely, and especially in terms of technology. I am a big person of I think Uranus does bring sudden change and get that kind of things. I like to think of technology as being mercurial, and I would say modern sort of digital, especially technology, because, for example, if you think about the blockchain technology, which is a sort of this decentralized system of data using collection, it's very Uranian in nature because it's highly unstable. I like that people attributed like when they're trying to give rulerships or not, which I don't believe in, but initially they gave Uranus to Aries, to the sign of Aries. And I like to not think of it that way, but more this fire cardinal energy of Aries, and to translate these changes that we're experiencing. And so I would, in how the technology is evolving and everything, I would have a close look at both Venus and Uranus, as Uranus is in Taurus, definitely.
Yeah, and so with this Venus retrograde in Capricorn, this is a long transit, right? So it's going to be in Capricorn into March, like well into March, and it's already been there since November. So this is a lot of time for Venus to be spending in one sign, and it happens every time Venus goes retrograde. But one of the things that's significant about this at a macro, like sort of economic level, is that this coincides with approximately the US Pluto return. And so one interpretation or one way of looking into this energy of the Venus retrograde is some kind of reevaluation around economic systems, because not only is it Capricorn, which has this sort of systemic descriptor that we use about it, but also because the US natal Pluto is in the Sibley chart's second house. And so for the US, Pluto describes hidden finances, or the connection of power and money, we could say, at just a very simple level. And so and also like resource extraction, you could say as well, all second house things. And in that chart, it's also connected to the 8th. So there's a lot of connection to debt as well as other people's money. And so if we look at what's going to be happening between now, as we speak, in January and March, the Federal Reserve in the United States is actually expected to raise rates in March. And, this is kind of like the moving target of when the Fed is going to raise rates, basically you know, when the Fed raises rates, the market usually goes down because there's like it makes the future more expensive, basically. And so when this happens, you know, it's because the government or the Federal Reserve thinks that the economy is stable enough now that we can stop injecting money just to like keep it going. And what's been happening for the last couple of years is that they have been injecting money just continuously, you know, through different relief programs, through the, you know, the COVID spending stuff. And, you know, that was already going on for a while before that through various Federal Reserve programs that were basically pumping money into the system. And people have been talking about, like, you know, this is not sustainable. This can't go on forever. And so the next sort of target that people have set is when the Federal Reserve meets in March. And that will be when Venus has just left Capricorn. And I think that maybe, let's see, what is our March chart actually? Yeah, so our March chart is at the very beginning of March, where Venus and Mars are at the very end of Capricorn, and they're about to move into Aquarius. And so what's interesting, this conjunction in Capricorn prepares Venus and Mars to move into a co-presence with Saturn. And this will actually be happening in the 8th house of the Federal Reserve. Aquarius is the 8th house of the Federal Reserve.
So the US has a Sagittarius rising in the CB chart, correct?
Yeah.
It's very interesting then, because it means that it has Libra in the 11th house. Is there anything in the 11th house of that chart?
No.
Because I then would think of, I mean, being French, and so not American, having never lived in the US, I find it very interesting, because as a sort of like outsider observer, you know, like most of my clients are American, and I have a fair amount of American friends on social media. It's clear that people are, you know, starting to question where the resources in terms of community are coming. And so it's interesting to see a sort of like acceleration of all this preoccupation during this Venus retrograde, as Venus rules the 11th house of, you know, communities and sort of the population and everything. And so it's like taking this literally long, hard look at what Pluto is doing, you know, and taking the time to be like, wow, we fucked up on a massive level and this is not okay. And for example, in the example of like strikes and the Caloric strike, and I'm like, yeah, because I mean, I'm French, so obviously I'm always gonna encourage a strike. But I find it very interesting with this Mars, this very powerful, yet, you know, controlled Mars coming in to help out, you know, this whole reflection around money and value, what the American people value, sort of being encouraged to action. That's very interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean, I wonder if it's help. Like Mars is exalted, so there's one way in which we could see it's helpful. Maybe it's like, it's still conflict though, so it's like productive conflict, productive in the sense of you know, it being fast and leading to an outcome quickly and efficiently, and like there's not a lot of fuss. It's just like the change happens because you know, it's Mars is well positioned to assert, you know, what something should be and make it happen. So I don't see the Venus Mars conjunction as necessarily like people getting along, right? Because it is Mars afflicting the social planet. So I do see this as, you know, certainly some kind of reckoning with power, and it does have this resonance within the 2nd house, so or of the US chart at least. So it has something to do with money and power, and you know, seeing it happen right before that Federal Reserve rate increase, and then we're looking at, you know, Saturn Uranus still being square, and then Venus and Mars are going to go into Aquarius and square Uranus.
Would you like to look at the February chart first, maybe?
Yeah, I know we kind of skipped that one. So
because yeah, what you say is very interesting. I do think there it's wow. look at that.
Right. So like, so Venus and Mars are conjunct right after Venus is stationed direct in February. And then, you know, the sun is conjunct Uranus and the sun is conjunct Saturn and they're squaring Uranus. So yeah, what do you think
And
about this
Venus station happens at 11 degrees of Capricorn, which is like basically 1 degree-ish away from Uranus.
one? Right.
And you know, trine. And so I think it sort of supports that. I love your little Vesta always
I've always got
hanging
Vesta.
around. I find that very interesting. The other thing I really wanted to mention was the nodes, which is going to be another big theme of 2022, because the nodes of the moon are moving into the signs of Taurus and Scorpio. So when the nodes of the moon move into a new sign, which is, the nodes are not real bodies, they're mathematical points that are calculated. They are traditionally linked to, well, to many things, but increase and decrease can be a keyword for the nodes. And so when the sun and the moon oppose or conjoin each other, so new moons and full moons close to the nodes and cause the ecliptic, an eclipse happens. So nodes are very, you know, transits are very powerful in that regard. And you know, they spend a good amount of time in Gemini and Sagittarius. And so you can look in your own chart to see where that was, and you can usually observe changes. But on the more mundane, more collective level, I think it's also interesting to observe the significations. Something I've mentioned on Twitter before was changes linked to contraception and reproductive issues, because traditionally Taurus rules reproductive organs. And so having literally the South Node in there symbolizing decrease of some sort, it made me think of, you know, that they've been trying to commercialize to the wider public male contraception. And it made me think that maybe with the nodes and moving into these signs and eclipses happening, we could see some new developments in the area, especially with the Uranus again in the close to the North Node. It could, lead to innovations, like technological innovations, possibly.
Mm-hmm. And I would say also anxiety. Like the nodes do introduce incredible change, and rapidly so, but they also do so at the expense of certainty around what exactly the change is. You know, when something sudden emerges, there, you know, for example, like the vaccine came out when there was an eclipse conjunct the fixed star Ras Al Hag, which is associated with medicine and or just you know, medical things in general. And that was when the vaccine came out. And so we had the vaccine, we had this like sudden emergence, but then at the same time we had all this anxiety around like the contents of the vaccine or the effects of the vaccine, et cetera. And I think in terms of what you're saying about contraception, I think that's a really brilliant point. And also the, you know, it's not necessarily going to be like, oh, like here's this new thing that we get to use and we're all happy about it. Like, I think there's also some controversial implications of that, right? Like, I think a lot of people could be upset.
I also mentioned, it also made me think of a medically assisted procreation. And the issue of opening it up actually has been quite a big topic, especially in France. So back in 2012, 2013, we had something called La Manif pour tous, which was people manifesting against a bill that proposed to legalize same-sex marriage in France.
So people protesting. You said manifesting, which I think English speakers don't know is like French for protesting.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thanks. They're always coming through. Okay, I really appreciate it. Thank you for keeping me from embarrassing myself.
It's like, oh yeah, these people are manifesting procreation. We're just all like, you know, lotus pose. And
manifest. Are you manifesting procreation? Coming here.
I know Jupiter is transiting our 5th houses, so like maybe we are.
After all, exactly. What we can think about.
Anyway, you were saying there was this program 2012, 2013. People were protesting for
protesting. Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely. And so the bill included not only same-sex marriage, but also the possibility of medically assisted procreation for same-sex couples, as well as for single women. And so, and it's quite recent. I can't remember if it was in 2020 or 2021, but it's really recent. They finally legalized single women. Single women and same-sex female couples to be able to use. They allowed them to use same-sex. Like procreation, medically assisted procreation, that kind of thing. But there was also sort of backlash because if I remember correctly, it didn't allow, I think, there was an issue with transgender people as well, because they literally, I think in France it's very restrictive. Like you have to go through as like a sex change operation or something to be able to claim any sort of status as a transgender, like someone of the opposite sex. French society is quite backwards in
I
that
know.
domain.
Yeah, France is like conservative in some very key ways. Like
yes, I think people don't realize that.
And it's a Catholic. I think it's because of the Catholicism, right? Like that's
absolutely. I mean, the protests against same-sex marriage back in 2012 were absolutely led by extremely conservative Catholics, and that's, I think, it's really funny to me because, I mean, I never really saw it, but growing up, people were always talking about, Paris as the city of love and that kind of things. Maybe it's because like my Saturn descendant line is going right through Paris, mainly, but I never saw it as that. And I think people can see French people as like quite liberated, and it's not because we kiss on the cheeks that we're progressive in any way. And so it's definitely I could definitely see that come around in France. And also I think Chris Brennan and Lisa Scheim and Austin Kopek in their Year Ahead podcast also mentioned abortion rights and everything. They talked about it in America, in the US, but abortion is in sort of danger in many countries, such as South America, like in Eastern Europe too. It's there's a lot of issues around that. So in general, reproductive issues, women's rights, and sexual minorities, right, could be, I think, a theme as the nodes move through this Taurus and Scorpio axis.
It also makes me think about like we had talked a little bit before we started recording about like male contraception and how that was a topic a few years ago, where male contraception, there was like a pill that men could take and it would basically make them like temporarily sterile so that they could basically do whatever they wanted. I mean, condom would still be good, but it would definitely be like protection from pregnancy. And so seeing the South Node moving in Scorpio, it makes me wonder if there is some kind of decrease in terms of fluids. Like it is a water sign, and in terms of contraception being to the extent that there are certain contraceptive mechanisms which require less fluid, right? Like that, those technologies might be the ones that we see advances with. So that's one thing. And then another one is that you use this interesting language of like backlash. And I think that's a really, it's really poignant for thinking about the Saturn-Uranus square, where as much as there is an advancement, there is like an equal and opposite sort of backlash, or like a reaction against progress. And I think that's where the Saturn comes in. But with the nodes, I think that there's also whiplash. It's like you have this sudden change with like eclipses and with nodes sort of activating a certain set of signs, and then there's like, oh my gosh, like how did we get here? Like I thought that we were going 60 miles an hour, and now we're like at a dead stop, and now there's this this velocity. this crazy velocity of the nodes. And so I think it's interesting, you know, we got to tune into not just the Saturn Uranus square, not just the node, like Uranus North node, but it's like, it's all of these fixed sign things happening at the same time. And so I think the combination of like backlash and whiplash is like really, that could be really propulsive and lead to a lot of upsets in society, even though Jupiter's in Pisces. And so there's this, like, I don't know what that Jupiter is about, honestly, because to me this year is so much about the fixed signs.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you have fixed signs in your chart, like if you have a fixed rising sign, so Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, it's definitely going to be an important, like, pivotal year for you if you have a placements. I couldn't even give a specific degree because everything is happening at very much. I mean, more so like
the second half,
15 degrees and onwards, you know, definitely. But it makes me think, you said like velocity and like, wow, how did you get there? It makes me think of like, you know, in movies, like when in the very beginning, like record scratches, like you probably wonder how I got there. It's definitely this sort of energy. It made me think of cloning too. I mean, we haven't heard of cloning and that kind of shit for a while, but with the nodes in Taurus, Uranus in Taurus being ruled by Venus, that's going to move into Aquarius, the sign of technology and everything. I think there's definitely a possibility for, as in when I say innovation or production, you know, that could definitely either like human cloning or even what's that like animal cloning for like consumption and like purposes and that kind of things.
I mean, it's interesting. So I'm just pulling up the chart of Dolly the sheep, who is
the first, I love how you have it on
the first ever. Of course I have like random shit like this in my database, but Dolly the sheep has Scorpio rising with so Uranus has been all this fixed stuff is going to be angular for Dolly the sheep. And I mean, obviously Dolly's dead, but we can still look at her chart.
She's dead? No. She's gonna live in a petri dish forever, as well as in our hearts.
True. So this chart is like, we can look at this as an inception for cloning, like cloning in general, especially like public perception of cloning, because Dolly like really raised cloning as like a political issue in the mid-90s. And so seeing that the moon is in Pisces at 16 degrees and it's square Mars.
And the fifth.
Yeah, right. So like procreation, right? Like this emphasis on like birth in the fifth house. And so Jupiter transiting that, you know, pretty interesting. And I think that might be, you know, a sign that what you're saying is onto something.
I love the Venus-Mars conjunction in the tree Gemini, and we're talking about like cells multiplying. Like, hey.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and also like the ruler of the ascendant in that chart being in the 8th house is also fascinating. Like as much as go ahead.
No, go on.
Well, as much as Dolly's cloning was about the possibilities for life, it was also like really important for generating discourse, Gemini, around the power over life and death. So like
I love the Cancer Mercury and Sun, you know, like ruled by that Pisces moon in the 5th. So like all this technology and everything in this very fertile signs. On that note, I definitely in 2022 look forward to like more water. Like we need more water. Like as in Jupiter and Pisces and everything. Like for the longest time, like in especially 2021, 2020, 2021, like it's been really dry in terms of signs and everything.
We haven't had an outer planet in a water sign. We haven't had an outer planet in a water sign for a while, other than the Neptune,
we haven't. Someone mentioned that to me, like, but Neptune is in Pisces. I mean, I personally haven't felt it very much.
I don't think that has I don't think that influences temperament at all.
I don't think so. And so I really look forward to that. I mean, I love a good like earth water combination. I definitely think that, it can be confusing what this Jupiter is about, but as I said, to me, it's this little window of optimism. It's not a
Mhm.
big window. It's not like a door that's wide open, but it's this kind of thing to look forward to. As in, if you've been walking for a really long time, you can't see any signs, you're kind of lost, you have to keep walking,
Right.
which
Faith.
is kind of the Saturn influence there. But all of a sudden, it just makes it so much more um potent when you actually have a goal, or when you actually have faith.
Hmm.
And to me, that's what Jupiter is about. Initially in Pisces, even if we can be disappointed after the
Hmm.
Neptune conjunction, and then in Aries, it's going to give all that fire, all that energy
Hmm.
to it. It's going to be my first Jupiter return since I'm 12. So I'm
Oh
really
my gosh.
excited.
Yeah. Congratulations. Yeah. Jupiter returns are
Thank
great.
you.
Jupiter returns are great.
Yeah.
My first or my second Jupiter return was really important for like, uh, well, I don't need to get into that, but what you're saying about water, um, what Jupiter and Pisces could be about is literally about water. Like,
Hmm. Yeah.
the
Rain on me.
yeah, that divine rain. Yeah. The threat of waterlessness or water wars, like Jupiter is a solution planet, and so seeing potentially things this year around helping the oceans or something about water sustainability, and the connection
Absolutely.
between civilization and the hydrosphere, we could say, becoming more harmonious and less bad for the hydrosphere, less extractive or something along those lines. So whether
Mm,
this is like ocean cleanup stuff or regulations on, because we do have a strong Saturn, regulations on pollution, like the Trump administration took away a bunch of stuff in the US. So like, good measures taken to maintain the health of the hydrosphere could be one way of looking at this Jupiter.
it reminds me of yeah, because it's either we don't have enough water, and people are in danger, and water is spiritually being polluted, taken away from them. With Jupiter especially, I think we could see people talk about sacred sites as
Mm-hmm.
well, which has been dramatically overlooked, and lots of rights have been taken. So a discussion around that, but also sometimes like too much water, because
Mm-hmm.
ice caps are melting, and people are saying, wow, the level of the sea
Mm-hmm.
is going to rise by like 30 centimeters, or 60, I think, actually, which is
Yeah.
big. It's a lot. And so it's you often talk about how um oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, hello, mishap. You often talk about how Jupiter is this moderating
Mm-hmm.
temperate influence, and so maybe we could see a more coherence between. Oh my God, is Uranus on the midheaven or
Yeah.
something?
For me, no, I think it's like Venus on the midheaven right now for me.
Okay, it's 7:59 p.m. where I'll keep that in mind. I'll check back. I think you can edit this part out,
No,
definitely.
no, bloopers stay in. I'm not editing shit.
Okay. Love that. Okay, okay. I'll keep that in mind. um, as I
Yeah,
was
no pressure
saying,
or anything.
so there's this like moderating influence that I definitely look forward to, and also as a more like casual side in Pisces for a good chunk of it, Jupiter is gonna slowly form a sextile to Uranus, and so I would say maybe unexpected pockets of water, like unexpected um discussions around that could definitely be a possibility.
Yeah, I could even see it being like the discovery of water on, whatever moon or planet, and something about like the dream, like the Neptunian vision that allows around the possibilities for life in other places. Like that's something that could happen. But going back to what you said about like indigenous people and water, um, the Saturn, so in terms of Neptune and Pisces, that transit has been important for native water rights. specifically through the lens of Standing Rock, which occurred, the Standing Rock issue in the United States in 2016, where they were trying to build a pipeline, and it was like threatening these these sacred waters of I forget what river it was, but basically that occurred during the Saturn-Neptune square, right on. So it was like Saturn in Sagittarius, I think it was like 9 degrees actually, and Neptune in Pisces at 9 degrees. And so what we see here, instead of a hard aspect from Saturn, we have an aversion from Saturn to Neptune. So the construction of new pipelines or something is like not as much at issue here, as opposed to we have Jupiter there. So maybe there's maybe there's some kind of giving back or some kind of generosity in terms of water, or some kind of healing that comes through the form of water. And I'm also noticing that Saturn in this chart that we have is actually conjunct Uranus by Antisha. So 19 degrees and 11 degrees of the fixed signs they have this like shadow conjunct relationship. And so seeing this early March period as, in a way, being very, very Uranian. And so we might see unexpected things in terms of this Pisces stuff, because it is an aspect to Uranus, right? Unexpected things around water, unexpected things around travel, unexpected things around religion and philosophy, and all those Jupiterian topics. So this is a super interesting month, March, as we look at it through the lens of this chart.
I'm very, like the outer planets are definitely having their moment in March, with Pluto as well, like the Venus and Mars like coming back to say hello. I want to say that I do like a Capricorn Mars very much, because it is exalted there, so it's like has a more temperate influence. It's still Mars, especially conjunct Pluto, and I wouldn't say it's all peace and everything. I like that Venus is gonna stay there all along, just to make sure everything doesn't go too bad. But
Venus is strained, right? Venus is strained, and it like keeping it, it's difficult to keep connections in that spot. Like Uranus or Pluto makes things feel like incredibly dirty, like it's Pluto's messy, like
so muddy. I use the metaphor of mud. I think I really like that. I think I used it. I wrote an article about Venus through Saturn ruled signs actually on my blog, and I was mentioning I really like to use the metaphor of mud for Pluto, because mud is, you can't see anything, you can't move, you can get a sense of panic when you're like all in mud, because it's really difficult. You're only focused on surviving, and at the same time mud has extremely regenerative properties. People do like mud baths and mud masks or something, because it has some very helpful nutrients, and people really like to think of Pluto in general as this destructive and transformative thing. And so to me mud is quite appropriate, especially as Venus is transiting it, so this all like earthy goo. I would say.
And like mud, I like that. I'm trying to think of other sort of earthy metaphors that we can use while this conjunction is an earth sign. Maybe like quicksand.
I was thinking of that. Not so much, I would say, because I wouldn't say Pluto is quick. It's just there. It's very it's very there.
And like I guess the part of quicksand that seemed resonant to me is like this downward pressure, or this like sinking. Like Pluto can be like a sinking feeling, or like that that shit's about to go down, and like how still, like if you move around in quicksand a lot, you're going to sink faster. And so there's like a kind of surrender that has to happen with Pluto energy. So yeah, I don't know, that metaphor seems, I feel like we've been on the first 3 months of this for like an
I
hour
was
or
going
so.
to say, would you like to talk about the Mercury there real quick before we move?
Oh yeah, well, Mercury conjunct Saturn. Yeah, I mean, I think you had some thoughts on this, right?
Yes, I really do like Mercury and Aquarius. I know it seems like I'm only mentioning placements that I have in my birth chart, but it's true. Mercury does have some dignity in the later degrees of Aquarius. And I really like the Mercury and Saturn sort of a combination because it gives a mind that's extremely sharp and focused and to the point. You can get really effective things done, and there I saw that as like this sort of official communication. Mercury is the messenger and close to Saturn in his domicile. It's I think you could see like this sort of communication of the establishment, especially in regards to like also we mentioned money and everything. Saturn is more so like the planet of business, and so maybe we could see new moves in terms of business in with this influence, especially as Mercury is moving towards Venus. I don't know, not towards Venus, towards like Pisces. So before doing that, before moving into the really Pisces, the sign of its full, where it's really, it has a very different quality. It's way more artsy and poetic.
Yeah.
And we have this very focused, practical, goal-oriented sort of a
Right.
mercurial influence.
Yeah, and I think this Mercury, because it's happened, this conjunction between Mercury and Saturn is happening in the fixed sign of Aquarius. It's about continuing thing, or like communicating strategies. You know, strategy is a mercurial topic. Communicating strategies to continue something, like to allow for structures to be maintained.
Being disciplined, being structured.
Yeah, so in somebody's personal life, this could look like, you know, you started something a while ago and now you're like continuing it, right? Or at a macro level, it could be, you know, like this plan needs to be revised in some way. We're going to make it work. We're going to strategically make it work with Mercury there, and like having that vision, or that sort of long-term thinking that Saturn affords to make the necessary changes. But I mean, again, it's like, it's square Uranus in the nodes. So I don't think that this Mercury-Saturn conjunction is without controversy again.
No, definitely. And before we move, I just want to mention the sun Jupiter cazimi as well. So Jupiter finds itself in its own domicile in the heart of the sun. And so it's literally being sort of regenerated, and it's being sort of born again, and in a new skin and everything. And I really love that. It's really refreshing, especially because I think the sun, with its light, brings truth. And so I think we could see a form of truth that's not depressing there, a form of truth that can genuinely be optimistic and forward looking. Because in the last few years, we've had more depressing like truth, and especially with like the sun Saturn cazimi that's happening before, like I think it's in January or early February. It's like, okay, this is what it is. It's depressing, and why are you being optimistic? And that one is like, no, actually I do have reasons to have hope, which I think transitions beautifully into the month of April, which a lot of people look forward to.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, so this is my sort of pet election for April. My favorite one of the year by far. I just think it's so lovely. So basically what we've got going on in April is Mercury moves from Aries into Taurus. We have, of course, the sun in Aries. The sun will be in Taurus for part of April as well. But what, you know, we have this very interesting combination of alignments, which is the conjunction of Venus and Jupiter, and the conjunction of Mars and Saturn. So we have both malefics in a malefic ruled sign, and we have both benefics in a benefic ruled sign. So what to make of this?
I think I think someone said on Twitter, like, about the whole Venus, Jupiter, and Pisces, which is fantastic, like squirting contest. I'm like, yeah, that's what I said out.
Okay, just disclaimer for the audience. We're both Scorpio risings, and so we cannot look at this without being like, ooh, that fifth house transit though.
If it wasn't already obvious. Yeah, I mean, I find it interesting that you picked a mercurial moon, because it's applying so beautifully to like everything, and it gives like a sense of like more practicality to this. You know, I love a bit of extra earth
Yeah,
in these
yeah.
times. And yeah, I mean, I love this chart. Like I am a personal fan of the Jupiter Neptune combo. Even if it can lead to disappointments later in the future, I for once choose to live in the present and be optimistic about what's currently going on. Um, and yeah, we have an exalted Venus that's finally out of Capricorn, and Aquarius out of Saturn ruled signs. It's exalted in Pisces, so that's like from day to night, literally like completely different set, completely different vibe. You go from like restriction, especially Venus with Saturn and Mars, you know, like co-present with these two, having like not the best time, I think it's
So
safe
what do
to
you think,
say.
so in people's lives, what do you think this Venus and Pisces transit will feel like, or what kinds of situations will be more available during that than other times?
So you're gonna have to look at the house that where Pisces is in your birth chart. But I would definitely say, especially after all these months, um, it could, to me, money would definitely be a big theme too, with both Jupiter and Venus that can signify wealth and money and that kind of things. Uh, both in water signs and their domiciliarization, to me, it could be a something more. I love that in English, the word like fair, it can mean like so many things. They can mean like beautiful and also like just, balanced, equal, which are all Venusian themes. And so in people's lives, I think we could find more balance towards even like that would turn like ecstatic, almost like a sense of profound relief. I think on Twitter, I think it's SJ Anderson that mentioned a time for grief as well, which I could definitely see, as in people not being able to mourn and grieve over everything that's been lost in these past 2 years. And all of a sudden, you know, everything comes out, everything. But I'm also very curious about, it's definitely extremes because we have these extremely dignified Jupiter and Venus, and we also have the malefic team averse to it on the other
Right.
side with Mars and Saturn in Aquarius. What do you think of
Right.
that?
So in people's lives, then that Venus Jupiter conjunction is going to be activating a whole house with all of the goodness that it could ever possibly desire. And then on the other hand, there's going to be another house, which is going to have all of the malefic sort of destruction and need for, you know, operating amidst challenge within a different area of life. So for Elo and me as Scorpio risings, this fifth house transit of Venus and Jupiter looks like a lot of good times, maybe even sexual stuff, fingers crossed, and, you know, just generally enjoying life,
Yeah,
parties and, you know, festivities of all kinds. And then on the other hand, Mars and Jupiter, or excuse me, Mars and Saturn are going to be conjunct in our fourth house. And so this could look like challenges around our living situation, or you know, stuff at home breaking, or needing to move, even though you don't feel like you're ready for it. That kind of stuff could be happening in our fourth houses because of Mars and Saturn being there. But based on your own rising sign, you know, so April is like all of the good and all of the bad is like in its own little corners of your chart. And so I think
yeah,
it'll feel, I think you use the word at some point like polarizing, I think is like a good
yeah,
word for this.
absolutely. I'm thinking also something that's important to mention is that Saturn has been in that house for a while. People born at night know that very well. Um,
Right.
Saturn has been in the house that Aquarius is in your birth chart. So, for example, if you're if if you're Cancer rising, it's been in your eighth house for almost, like 3.5 years now, and it can really feel like um Mars is coming in to like throw oil on the fire, but it's not gonna feel. I think it's more gonna highlight existing things or like annoying themes you've been experiencing that may pop up actually when Venus and Mars enter Aquarius already.
Right.
You're gonna feel like a heightened energy, and yeah, when these two are left alone in there. I mean, how long are they co-present in Aquarius, just the two of them, before Mars moves into Pisces?
Oh, I mean, like 6 weeks probably. Like the
Mm-hmm.
normal sort of Mars transit. This also
Yeah.
happened in April of 2020. So if you want like a hint at what kinds of themes might be coming up, Mars and Saturn were also conjunct in Aquarius at that time. So even without knowing sort of your like your rising sign, you could even potentially just look back at that time and see, maybe some of the themes from that month will recur.
I was literally like at home, extremely bored, but making extremely good cocktails. So there's that.
Well, that sounds about right.
I was extremely active. I remember I was at that time I had exams coming up in spite of everything, and so I was literally really stressed out, definitely, but like writing all the time and just being pretty bored. Uh, so it's definitely not the worst manifestation of that. But I think to me it can feel like, especially with Neptune and Pisces there and Jupiter, it was just like escapism, like literally, like to me, I could see that as like, wow, maybe I don't know, having an annoying landlord or like things not going, like everything breaking in my house and being like, okay, I'm gonna go at this party. Like turning into a seven day in a more type of party.
Yeah, for you and me, this is definitely like, don't spend time at home. Like, go out.
So many Scorpio risings out there.
I know, right? I feel like 90% of the people who are into astrology are Scorpio risings, because it's like the one thing where we're told that we're special and we feel like this, we're deep and secretive and sexy and all that. Like, I think the interpretations around Scorpio rising that are like on the internet are like the most tailored to how Scorpio risings want to be perceived.
Exactly. It's so like flattering and everything like that, and like of course I'm like, you're so quirky and different and innovative.
Yeah, like what if astrology is just telling people what they want to hear? Oops, no, not the case. Speaking of jokes, Mercury being in Taurus now. So we just talked about Mercury being in Aquarius in the previous chart, but now it's already in Taurus like the following month. So Mercury just whips through Pisces, it whips through Aries. And so now we have this Mercury, which is on the Uranus side of the Saturn-Uranus square. And so in terms of, Héloïse, you mentioned earlier, like you think that Mercury is technology. I wonder if you could like elaborate on that in the context of this transit.
Absolutely. So traditionally, Mercury is linked to everything that's like technological innovation and everything. I think you can really see that with artists. I mean, Virgos love to mention what Virgo artists share a sun sign with them. But if you think of Beyonce and Michael Jackson, there are artists that are known for pushing, the technology used in their concerts, pushing forward things always. And so I'm very interested in this. I think we could see like quite positive or like really cool technological changes as Mercury moves towards Uranus, and both being ruled by this exalted, beautiful Venus, and with Jupiter there. I think we could see or maybe even hopes and dreams, that are not necessarily realistic with the Neptunian influence, but definitely this sort of like cutting edge. I'm also thinking it could be in terms of food as well. It could be in terms of art and money. As I mentioned, I think money is going to be a big theme. So it could be innovations in that regard,
so like there
definitely.
being like information coming about technologies that relate to like art or food or money, because Mercury rules information. But also like what you're saying about Mercury and technology, I think that we can probably trace the genealogy of that in traditional astrology to Mercury's rulership of the hands, and the way that, you know, prior to, well, I guess even today, like how much of the technology that we use is at the tip of our fingers, right? Like whether it's, you could think of something as simple as a knife. A knife is technology, but so is our phone. And how do you manipulate your phone? It's like all with the hands. And so technology is like, you know, it's an appendage. It's an extension of our consciousness, in the same way that Mercury is an extension of the sun, right? Like the intellect of the sun has this this winged messenger traveling with it, and sometimes reaching out a certain distance and being able to pull something back. So I think that the traditional connection of Mercury to technology is so interesting, because of that connection to the hands. And we do still see that today, but like you were saying earlier, with Uranus being maybe more like a digital technology, or like this ability to cross time and space, I think is a Uranian thing, because it's like beyond Saturn, right? And so maybe there are innovations in terms of how we can project consciousness through time and space around this. So like an example, like just like Google Maps is an example of this. Like, you know, you can look at the world and you can sort of travel around it, and maybe you can even do like a time capsule thing where you put yourself back 10 years and you see how the land has changed. So, you know, this awareness of, you know, like the earth changing beneath your feet, and like, in what ways can that be, in what ways can that become a tool in some way? Or like, how can you interface with those changes in a useful way, like Mercury and Taurus looking for something useful to communicate and to use technologically.
Actually, that's very interesting. That's very important, especially, you know, like the hands thing. I mean, something that allowed humans, you know, to evolve into like complex beings capable of inventing and everything. It's like opposable, like thumbs, which is also a natural thing. Because Mercury, rules over Gemini, and Gemini rules over like hands and different things. I'm also like, to conclude on this April chart, I think what makes its strength is like it's balance. I like that. I do really think that Mercury brings a type of balance there, because we also have an Aries sun, and an exalted sun, especially with the influence of Mars, you know, can be really you definitely feel it, I would say.
Yeah, it's clarifying.
I was gonna say, it's literally like an actual astrologer's like dream, because we're always trying to like put the malefics away and like emphasize the benefics, and it's like, all right, you go into the dark house, you go into the 12th house, not to be seen.
Well, that makes me think about like, you know, what is Mars and Saturn good for? It's definitely good at tearing things down. In fact, I want to say that the last Mars-Saturn co-presence in Aquarius coincided with this. I would have to double check this, but like taking down statues in the United States, like statues of like Confederate people. I would have to go back and double check that. It might have been a little later.
Are you sure? Because that I think that was during after the assassination of George Floyd.
Yeah, that could have been Mars and Aries, actually.
I think it would be late that, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. So that would have been Mars and Aries when they were square, but still the Mars-Saturn combination reflecting this, like if Saturn is the past and Mars is like, you know, like a destructive force that's like severing. It's like separating oneself or separating ourselves from the past in some way. And one way that the past is present is through structures like buildings and, you know, all sorts of monuments. So that's one way that this could show up, is through a revival of a sort of interest in taking down things that symbolize pasts that are not desirable.
I'm thinking of this, not specifically maybe this part, but this configuration would be so great for like a demolition party, or like when you're in a house and like remaking everything, but you want to make it fun and you invite people and everything.
Yeah.
It could definitely be a thing. Um, the chart that you have, it's very it's funny because the sun is in the eighth house of like shared like shared gains and everything, and the role of the second house is Venus in the seventh.
Yeah.
Material girl. It's definitely I'm on a quest to find my rich husband.
Yeah. Well, actually, yeah, this is actually a chart that I found for homework in Austin Copic's class, where it was like it was in our electional astrology unit, and we are trying to find a chart for like an ask, like, you know, you ask somebody for a favor or like some kind of opportunity. And yeah, this is what I chose for that because it obeys a number of electional principles with respect to
And
that.
it's also like in the Mercury ruled by Venus in the ninth house is like meaning a foreigner and kind
Yeah.
of things. I like that. I'll keep the chart in mind. I like it.
Are we ready for May?
I think we are.
Okay, so let's do May and June, and then maybe we'll take a little break.
Ooh, she's different.
Yeah. Okay, so this May, I don't think you've seen this one yet. I chose this one after we chatted. So basically what we've got going on in May is, so we have the Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Pisces at the very end of April, right on this eclipse in Taurus.
Like, and then they're minutes away from each other.
Yeah. And so it's wild that the eclipse in Taurus coincides with Venus, the ruler of Taurus, being conjunct Jupiter. And it looks like a really important launching point for the Uranus and Taurus story. Of course, Uranus has already been in Taurus for a long time, but we see Uranus getting here to that middle point of Taurus, 15 degrees, which is a very powerful degree in the zodiac, is like 15 degrees of the fixed signs. They're sort of like the most fixed. And so if we think about Uranus disrupting that which is fixed, I do see this as sort of a pivotal eclipse in that Uranus and Taurus story, and kind of coexisting alongside this idealism or this optimism of Venus conjunct Jupiter. And, you know, Saturn's still involved, but we do have these, I would say, a pretty interesting eclipse that does inspire some optimism, I think.
It's like night chart, all stars, the Venus and Mars, like in Pisces, and like that Taurus. I think that's I mean, I love this. I really like I'm really fascinated by this upcoming eclipse, because it's going to be the first one where we have the nodes that actually moved. We had the first eclipse in Taurus back on November 19th, 2021, but the nodes hadn't moved yet. Yeah, why did you specifically pick this chart?
Oh, well, I was just looking for the moon to have a little bit of separation from the eclipse itself. And fortunately, in my location, the moon is just separating from Saturn and applying to Jupiter and Venus in this chart. So
flexing, okay, American.
I know, yeah, for you it would be super applying. But I mean, I guess the point of this chart is to show that like Saturn is still a thing. We're not escaped from Saturn just because we have like a Venus-Jupiter conjunction. Venus is a temporary, you know, little flourish on top of Jupiter and Pisces, whereas, you know, Saturn and Uranus are like the big hitters of this year. And here we do see Saturn squaring the nodes now. So that nodal square for Saturn representing, you know, like Saturn doesn't know, like it's competing information. It's like Saturn is getting some advice from the Scorpio side of the axis, which is like, don't be so intense, or like release this intensity, or let go of let go of certain desires. Whereas the north node in Taurus is like, let's leap forward, let's do something new. And so being caught in this backward looking, forward looking place with Saturn could be very stressful. And it makes me think about the sort of brittleness of the Saturn-Uranus square. Like, I think that aspect is very brittle in the sense that a small amount of pressure, it could undermine like larger structures.
Like almost like it doesn't know what it wants, because very shocking, and like fast measures come in every time they square exactly, but it's not followed up by a long-term strategy. For, like, as a reminder for people, so when a planet is at the bending, so like squaring nodes, it's like it sort of reaches a critical point. It, it's like emphasized extra pressure. And so as you said, it's super interesting what you're saying about like, so bringing about like all this change and like this everything getting faster. I'm thinking of pressure on resources. They're not and so in this configuration, the eclipse of the nodes will not be configured super close to Pluto, but as the moon will move towards like, the last degrees of Taurus after the eclipse, is going to make this like trine to Pluto with Saturn still at the bendings. And so I'm thinking of like this pressure being put on like quote unquote the establishment, on, as you said, like fixed structures. So it can be government and things that sustain the wealthy, and like potential like wealth inequality. And so this trine, I'm not sure if it like of like Taurus Capricorn, it's gonna bring like this emphasis on like wealth and resources, be natural, the environment, or like hoarding, like Northern and Taurus, it's literally accumulation with an end. And so I'm thinking of this as, we mentioned, I think we talked a bit about it before we started recording, but about the Pandora Papers as well. And how it largely went under the radar. And so I don't think I had the time to find a time chart, but I do remember that during that period, Mars was in Libra under the beams of the sun, like combust even when it was released. And so I wonder if like this new spotlight on wealth and resources, like the hoarding of resources, financial scandals, could come to the forefront again.
Yeah, I think it definitely emphasizes things that are extreme. So whether that's like extreme surprise at the level of financial corruption among powerful players in global society, or whether it's extreme measures being taken to secure resources, like to combat food insecurity or something. Like I noticed that Mars, sort of like the planet of action and like getting things started, is in the same sign as Venus and Jupiter. And so there is sort of like a benevolent side of this Mars where it's like trying to do good. And I think that because this eclipse is happening in Taurus at the same time, it points toward empathetic action for the betterment of people's conditions relative to resources, relative to food and clothing and all of those like Taurian things. So I could see some like, things with beauty also, like maybe some kind of fashion movement where there's sort of like a naturalist aesthetic or something along those lines. We'll have to clip this later when all this stuff comes true and like say, look, we called it.
Definitely. I think 2022 is going to be such a big year for art, and artistic creation and that kind of things. I mean, I don't know about other people, but I've been feeling kind of bored or like underwhelmed about like all these like remakes of movies, of films, of everything. I think a lot of art has been centered around repetition and coming back to previous influences, but remaking them without adding anything new. You know, as in repetition and going back to something is very powerful in terms of aesthetics. But if you're not bringing anything new or a commentary on your current things. It's not, people don't like it very much usually. And I read a piece recently about the fact that NFTs were so boring because they're straight out the mind out of the minds of like tech bros and finance bros, and it's like it's everything you can come up with, like really like the board ape. And so I'm hoping at least that this is gonna bring the Mars Jupiter Venus in Pisces, which makes me think of fresh, something fresh actually, something new and sexy.
Yeah, so,
very sexy.
Definitely artistic innovation with this one. I think that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, what you're saying about like the remake thing, I totally know what you mean. Or I can think of a couple examples of things that I've seen where it's like all it's doing is taking the same narrative, sometimes even like animated stuff that, like, for example, there was a remake of like the first Pokemon movie recently, and it was literally the same exact thing. All they did was change the digital, like they changed the technology with which they were sort of, it looked new, right? It looked new instead of like the 90s. And it's like, if the point of this is to be nostalgic, like the medium is like the aesthetic of the original is the nostalgia. It's not like, so I don't understand what we're getting from these like remakes that are just like making it look newer. Like, what's the point of that? Maybe it's meant Jupiter and Capricorn showing.
I love in the chart that you chose that Mercury's right there, like at 1 degree of Mercury. That's so, I really like it because Gemini, because it's very like, I'm not dealing with this shit. I'm sorry. I will not be interacting with you at present. Like everyone is like getting into their fixed shit, and Mercury's like, I am not participating.
Well, yeah, Mercury, that's interesting. And Mercury is getting ready to slow down though. So like Mercury will retrograde back into Taurus, and station around the North Node roughly. So like Mercury will get some say on the eclipse, but it's going to travel into Gemini first and maybe bring back some useful information to Taurus before proceeding further.
Which is why I've really been thinking about the Pandora papers in that situation as well, because like financial stuff, but like with this sort of like Mercury that's like bringing new information into light, and then going retrograding back into Taurus, like, hey, all this information I mentioned earlier, what it has to do with, what it's also involved with. Guess what? Money. And so that's definitely
I'm just trying to see. So like the Mercury retrograde cazimi happens at 0 Gemini, and then it's interesting, like Mercury retrogresses as it makes an aspect to Mars. So
you say retrogress?
That's a word.
Can't you say retrograde?
Retrogress, like it retrogresses.
Oh,
like
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's like ingress or retrogress, like if it crosses a sign boundary.
Oh, well, learning new things as we're looking at Mercury. How fitting.
Right, because technically, language is a shifting beast, but I think that retrograde is an adjective, not a verb, personally.
Technically, that's very Gemini Mercury.
Yeah, I know, right? we gotta bring that energy in.
I was gonna say also, I wanted to mention that again, I'm a very big fan of Mars and Pisces, and I really look forward to it moving out of I think I do look forward to Mars and Capricorn. I really even look forward to Mars and Pisces. It's gonna do its whole separate thing in Aries, but in Pisces, it does have a lot, especially at the end of the sign, it does have a lot of dignity. I mean, literally by being triplicity, bound, term, everything under the sun. And I really look forward to that because it's sort of like moving the benefics like into action. And also in the chart that you're showing is just separating from a sextile to the sun into a sextile to Uranus. So I think Mars is very like he's talking to pretty much everybody except Saturn, which he hasn't done in a while, which I definitely find refreshing and useful. And as you mentioned, I think that it's very astute that you said um, moving things into action, doing things for good.
Yeah.
I mean, as good as Mars can get, but still.
Yeah, I also love, like, Mars being my ascendant ruler. I just love Mars and Pisces as a transit. Like, basically any Pisces transit I like, because it's the fifth house. I feel like most people enjoy fifth house transits, kind of. I mean, maybe except for Saturn. We'll see about that. But yeah, I think that Mars and Pisces is really helpful for just like asserting one's energy gently and being like inviting while not necessarily being like it's this energy of like offering a perspective, or like offering like a Jupiter thing, like offering something inspiring and then being like, what do you want to do with that? Like there's this mutability to it where it's very capable
It's
of
very
going.
active.
Yeah, it's
Having
very
I
active
mean,
it's subtly active.
yeah, I mean, I do have a Scorpio rising. My chart was a Pisces Mars, which I absolutely love. And I think it's definitely good at asserting, for me personally, and like asserting yourself, you know. I like that. I think maybe the benefits in Pisces can have a tendency of like losing yourself, you know, into like connections with others, and then once that's over, especially with Neptune, like sort of sobering up and being like, why did I do that? But like maybe even a feeling of being used, you know, as in like, wow, I'm giving so much without expecting return, and then realizing maybe I should have expected more. And so I feel like that Mars brings in more discernment. And it's not a Saturnian discernment as in isolating or like necessarily putting boundaries. It's not severing, like, you know, this is your space, this is my space. And if we do acknowledge that, we can have a productive encounter. I think that's very Pisces Mars.
Yeah, I totally agree. Should we go on to June?
Yes.
Okay. June.
I can't remember what the chart for June was. Oh boy. Oh yeah. Wait, is it now? Oh.
Yeah, so.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so June we get Mars and Jupiter into Aries at the same time. So
yeah.
this
Big
is
move. Big move.
this is big dick energy for sure. Like I love just the combination of Mars and Jupiter is so friendly. It's like, you know, I don't like to idealize war so much, but if
It's
you think
himbos.
it's like, yeah, himbos getting along and drinking beer. Like it's like it's very like
dudes being dudes, like guys being dudes.
No, it's like this chart is freaking like just the way the moon is. So the moon is square Venus, the moon is trine Jupiter, the moon is trine Mars, and it's like there's a lot of fire this month, right? So in terms of, and it's a lot of Aries fire. So in terms of starting something, you know, going out on a new adventure, beginning important projects that you know, you're very inspired about at the get-go. And you know, while Mars and Aries can have a little bit of trouble with, or a lot of trouble with, longevity and like sustaining the focus, Jupiter is going to moderate that excessive heat and make it more easy to wield. So, you know, like if you have a sword that's like just coming straight out of the whatever the thing is that you know, it's still hot, right? Like the sword is super hot, and if you just go brandishing it around, you could easily get burned. But Jupiter helps temper that heat, and also like through that temperance helps the sword like be more long lasting and solid. It gives Mars a little bit of strength that it's not used to having, and it's a strength of belief, rather than just a strength of muscle or courage, you know?
Definitely. That's so interesting. It makes a lot of sense what you're saying about like moderating again, like the heat. And I do think, after like all these months, like we do need some cardinal energy. I feel like we've dealt with a lot of like fixed stuff, like, and it's good. Like it's enduring, definitely. If you're trying to build something enduring, that's true. And Jupiter, when it was in a cardinal sign, when it was in Capricorn, it had this benefic energy of like Venus helping out, but Venus and Mars, it's quite different. It's like passion and everything, and like, yeah. But with Jupiter, again, in a cardinal sign, it's quite different. It's what sort of myth, what sort of a bigger project, bigger picture do you put your energy at the service of, I really appreciate, I really like that. It can be, it's still Mars in Aries, and especially because the last time Mars was in Aries, it spent like way too long in there. I mean, I had a good time with Mars in Aries. Maybe it was
well, yeah, I mean, last time Mars was in Aries, it was retrograde and square Saturn and Pluto and Jupiter. So it was like that Mars in Aries was, I think, a great example of when Mars in Aries disagrees poorly, as opposed to agree or disagreeing well. And I think that Mars in Aries conjunct Jupiter is disagreeing well. Like, oh, we just see it a different way. And I actually value that we see it a different way because I learned something, like being able to take that assertiveness of Mars in Aries, assert yourself, assert your view, and then somebody else asserts their view. And it's like, oh, dope. We kind of, I see, maybe I don't agree with you, but I see why you think that. And I learned something. So that kind of philosophical approach of Jupiter, like always looking to expand the vision, expand the horizons of your knowledge, actions being taken that further your knowledge, or conflicts that further your knowledge, and being able to expand together, even though we might not be on the same page about everything.
Constructive criticism, or like constructive
absolutely.
Debate, sort of.
Especially
Debates. Oh my god! If someone ever tries to like debate me again using that bad word in my entire life, I'm just gonna die anyway.
Yeah,
that's Mars in Aries for you.
Yeah, I think I'm just getting on a soapbox here because this is my natal Mars. I think that shit, I think I just lost my
this himbo energy.
I know I know, like I get like yeah. It's I'm just gonna say I actually lost my train of thought with that. So
yeah, I was just gonna say, I do appreciate also like there is more balance in terms of like planetary like repetition, like how things are falling into, like we're just coming out of heavy, all or nothing. Like it's either Saturnian or like a tiny bit of a Venusian here and there, like something like that in 2020 and 2021. And there it's pretty, we do have Saturn in Aquarius, and then Jupiter and Mars in Aries, Venus and Mercury in Taurus, all of that, like mutable, fixed, cardinal. It's a bit more balanced. I really appreciate that. But like to me, Mars, Jupiter, and Aries is definitely like big, like himbo energy. Like you need to think, just do it.
Like you don't have to think, you will just learn by doing. I think is part of
Venus and Taurus is definitely like you're gonna be like being nice and like not thinking too much, just being sexy and nice, and I really like that.
That's a great point that Venus is in Taurus at the same time. Just one more thing about the and I think that also helps with social sort of accord, like to my point about disagreeing
the well. Venus is not in the best place, I'll say that.
Right. I mean, it's like it is in its domicile, but it's conjunct Uranus and square Saturn and conjunct the node and all that. But with the Mars Jupiter, I think that it's also like there's this tendency when we disagree with people to be like, in my experience, like always sort of situating our perspectives within like, well, this is just what I think. But I think a lot of times that's just like passive aggressive. And it's like, well, like, this is what I think. And this is like, you know, at the end of the day, it's like I think that the in my experience language is often like disingenuous.
And weaponized.
And
True.
weaponized. Yes, that's a great point. And I think that this Mars and Jupiter combination is a great opportunity to just not qualify anything. Just be like, this is what I think. And I would love to hear what you think, but this is what I think. And so like taking away that sort of passive aggressive energy of like, in my experience, this is and like, and here now
Yeah.
I'm going to prove why you're wrong. But like, I'm
As
not
if you're
interested
taking
in,
any credit off. Yeah, like
yeah. Or just like, I'm not interested in proving anybody wrong. I'm just interested in putting forward my idea.
yeah, definitely. That's such a great point. I would think that with the I like that there's a bit of fixed energy, because I would think that things that you would start, actually, like they could have a great start but be a bit more enduring if you play your cards right. I'm thinking of a it's because I've been trying for like some time to start doing sports again, like in a more, and I tried like at different times, but it's just like difficult for me because sometimes I'm just, there's something about physical effort that's like sustained and stuff like that that I have a hard time with, or like group dynamics and that kind of things. And so I think if you're trying to start again something that's strenuous, but without it feeling like a chore, like it can definitely be a great time, because you do have this like very dynamic Jupiter Mars in a cardinal like fixed sign. It's a cardinal fire sign is going to start something, but then you do have this Saturn and you do have Venus. You know, to me, it even looks like something like with the Venus Uranus thing, like throwing something on a web and it actually being long lasting. You know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah, like spontaneity that produces something enduring.
yeah, I think that I could see that happening.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, another Mars Jupiter thing is like, um, I don't know, there's an explosiveness to it. And I think we'll see that again with, yeah, we'll see that again with Mars Uranus. I know you and I, it's just like a constant like innuendo. Like you just put us in a room and we're just gonna. I know we have the minds of like 13-year-olds who just learned what sex is.
We do. Ah, that's
But
why I always say it's good to get with people who have the same rising sign as yours, because
it's like, yeah. So yeah,
yeah.
I think in our next chart we're gonna get into the Mars Uranus, and there's actually like kind of a similar energy of Mars Uranus compared to Mars Jupiter, but you know, in addition to like the sort of personal level that we've been talking about with the Mars Jupiter conjunction, I think that there's also, I mean, it could also be like an explosive time, literally, like in terms of, you know, remember there was like some, I forget what city it was in the Middle East that had that weird random bomb thing just happened suddenly. It's like,
Beirut. That
yeah,
was in
yeah, it
Lebanon.
was Beirut. Like that kind of event is definitely like a Mars Jupiter kind of event. In fact, I think it was under a Mars Jupiter aspect. It was either that or Mars Uranus. I can't remember.
I was gonna say, it reminds me of when people were kind of scared because I think I don't know how you call it again, but like the presidential like inauguration or something, in America, like in the US, and then I think the Biden thing happened. You know, like this inauguration day happened right when Mars was conjunct Uranus, and then it ended up being like spectacular fireworks.
Oh,
And
interesting.
so that's quite literally like this
Mhm.
explosive sort of thing, or like aesthetic explosion. Like I could think of like a really beautiful, great festival or
Mhm.
show with a lot of like, especially with Venus and Taurus, you know, with this like wow, like, but yeah, it can be like explosions too and more.
Yeah, and there's many ways to look at Venus and Mars, and there's many ways to look at like gender, but I would say that one way that I would like to interpret the Mars Jupiter is in terms of like a celebration of masculinity, and like what are the parts of masculinity that are, you know, worth cherishing, or like worth making a part of a vision for a future.
Yeah, and especially with the nodes in Scorpio and Taurus.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, maybe some kind of gender dynamic in terms of the nodes being in those signs. Yeah.
And Mercury retrograding back, like, well, separate, but like being in Taurus again for a little while. And so, like, reflections around gender, celebrating like the diversity of what you can possibly have, and maybe this whole contraception thing I mentioned, having like new developments and everything, like that could be a thing. But I do like Mars and Aries thing, when it's like it has positive like aspects and everything. Like, for example, people love to talk about I love how, like the stereotypical Aries sun is like never like what Aries suns are really like. I mean, they're like, wow, Aries suns are so like even almost like stupid, or like, very like just running into things without thinking and
Naive.
being very angry. And I'm like, I've seen people think, oh, because it's ruled by Mars, it's like anger. I'm like, have you ever met an Aries sun? I mean, like, it's really like this sweet, to me it's like this really like kind of sweet energy. I think it's really a sweet one,
I agree.
because like,
yeah, no, I think it's I mean, I think it's affable because it's naive, and it like doesn't know any better than to just be itself a lot of times.
And with the sun in Gemini, with Venus and Taurus, I think that's fine. I think that,
no, I mean, this looks like a really a nice month for a lot of things, like a nice month for Mars things, Venus
and for
things,
a lot of people too.
Yeah. The Venus-Uranus conjunction and Venus crossing the node, like, I mean, this kind of goes back to like some kind of gender themes where like Venus as the traditional signifier of women transiting Uranus, like upsets or disruptions or surprises regarding women's issues could also just be like a break from what has been practiced in terms of women's issues. So that could be the
so many people are going to be getting buzz cut. So like people with long hair, and they're like gonna like it's really a thing, I think.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the node too just makes it shadowy. Yeah. All right, so now on to July, and I believe, Héloïse, you picked this one, didn't you?
I did indeed.
Wait, this isn't it.
Yeah.
Though. Wait, is this it? No, I picked this one. You picked the next one. Yeah.
I picked is it the Moon Venus?
You did.
I think it's in July.
Oh,
but maybe you picked something else.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. Okay, so let's just go to that.
That's
let's
okay.
Go to the Moon Venus. No, let's do the Moon Venus.
Oh,
I like that.
Because it's quite messy.
Yeah.
I think it was Moon Venus with a. Oh yeah, but never mind, because there was Jupiter on the ascendant in my location, but.
I think we were kind of speculating about an Aries rising for this one. Yeah, so basically what we've got going on at this point is that in July, Venus moves from Gemini to Cancer. And so in terms of describing the Uranus and Taurus story, we have that level of modification where things go from the sort of upbeat and communicative Gemini into the soft and sensitive Cancer. But at the same time, Mars moves into Taurus. And so whereas in June, we had the Mars-Jupiter conjunction, now we have the Mars-Uranus conjunction in Taurus, which is going to incredibly activate the Uranus North Node conjunction, as well as the Saturn-Uranus square. So all these themes around instability and social change are very much brought to the forefront this month. So yeah, what do we think about this little period in July?
Find it very interesting. Something I wanted to mention, well, it's coming to completion a bit after the time of that chart, but is the Mars-Uranus conjunction. It happens at 18 degrees of Taurus. And the interesting thing is that later in the year, we have the almost exact, but it never goes exact, but like in the same degree, basically, Saturn Uranus square that also happens at 18 degrees of, well, Aquarius and Taurus. And so it's basically both malefics making hard aspects to Uranus. And in terms of what that means, I would say it makes me think of like a sudden like shocker, almost like something that initially like a first hit, but it's with Mars in Taurus, you know. So it sounds really powerful, you know, but it's not like the best expression or the most constructive expression of Mars.
Right. It's
And
like
then
unnecessary conflict or
yes,
ill-conceived conflict. Like I remember like the Capitol riots in the US were during
yeah,
Mars-Uranus conjunction in
absolutely.
Taurus.
Conflict over resources. Although this time it's not going to square like Saturn as tightly, but definitely the second hit per se of Saturn coming to square Uranus again is going to, I think, come back to reinforce the structure, sort of like this thing, you know, like further destabilize the initial thing that happens around that time of the year. It's going to be a hot summer.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think
But
that can I go off on something?
yeah, of course.
So like you mentioned like yeah, it's both malefics contacting Uranus, and from a traditional perspective, even though Uranus isn't a traditional planet, we could treat that like an affliction to Uranus. Like Uranus is basically as afflicted as it possibly could be here because it's conjunct a node, which is an affliction, it's conjunct Mars, and it's square Saturn. And so if Uranus represents utopian thinking, or that way in which we try to forecast the future in a positive light, or try to bring rebellious changes, or try to upset systems in favor of greater justice or equality, that is severely challenged during this transit. So I think that as much as like there will be like an activation, like Mars conjoining Uranus is like an activation of that desire, but it's not an effective activation. And so I think we would have to look forward to maybe Mars in Scorpio, or Mars getting some essential dignity and reactivating this Saturn Uranus stuff to see like a more progressive sort of move. I think that a lot of times Mars in Venus ruled signs can just be like relational upsets that don't really lead to much.
Pretty interesting in terms of bringing about all that change. The reason why I picked that chart is also because there's very contrasting energy going on, which seems to be a theme for 2022. Because we have this wonderful Cancer moon being enclosed by benefics, you know, and we have Jupiter that's like on his own. Mars is the ruler of Jupiter here and not doing too well, but still we have Jupiter there, and the moon like being enclosed, so separating from this aspect to Jupiter and moving towards like this wonderful, pretty much an afflicted, you know, Cancer Venus. I think that's really a really sweet energy, and it's definitely, you know, I think maybe you remember this happened in early June of 2021. It was a really fun, like good time for me. And when I was looking through like when the next Moon Venus aspect was, like someone brought that chart, I was like, oh, good, and it's enclosed by benefics. Oh, wait a second. Oh, wait, no, what's going on here? So there's this like strong Mars Uranus that's like brewing, definitely. And you also have an exact like with the chart have like sextile of like um no, not sextile, this exact square of like Mercury and Leo and Taurus Mars, and I'm like, wow, that's loud, like
Mhm.
really loud. And Mercury's being supported by this well, support is a big word because it's on a beams, but like it's ruled by this powerful Leo sun. And I find it very interesting that you have this exact square. So on one side, this really sweet, fun, yeah, like nice, loving, pure kind of energy in Cancer with
Mhm.
the Moon and Venus there, and then this like strong like clash of Mercury
Mhm.
uh and Mars. So I found that quite interesting.
Yeah, I think that Mercury, like the fact that Mars is in a Venus ruled sign to begin with, lends itself toward like disharmony,
Mm-hmm.
because it's Mars trying to use the tools of Venus, which Mars does not like to do. And so that can just lead to relational upsets of all kinds. And when you throw in the Mercury square to Mars into that, it definitely amplifies it. And I think that with Mercury square Mars, it's like something can, get under your skin, or because it's in fixed signs, something that somebody says can become uh, like a long-standing, like something that gets under your skin over time, and it like sustains this anger, or
Mm-hmm.
frustration. And so as people sort of move through July and work with this Mars Uranus conjunction in Taurus with that Mercury aspect, like just remembering that it's okay to just be pissed off by things, and like it will, like the pissing off will stop, and you don't need to throw out the baby with the bathwater just because you get annoyed one time. Like I think that a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times Mars and Taurus, there's a tendency to, not necessarily natal placements, but like by transit, there's a tendency for, like in discourses, for there just to be like beating a dead horse, sort of like, yes, we get it, like we understand what the problem is, but there's this like incessant sort of like piling on effect with it. um, and I think that that is something to watch out for during this time period. Like how helpful is that really? And so when we think about like Mars and the essential dignity of Mars by transit, I think that oftentimes there's just um, an incredible amount of conflict that isn't really leading anywhere, and it's just making people mad at each other.
Yeah, I would really suggest staying off of social media at that time,
Totally.
particularly. Yeah, and like with the Jupiter in Aries, that's not making things better. Um, to me, it's like maybe something sweet that is not really like that's quite short lived. Something sweet that can
Mhm.
easily turn sour, I would say.
Yeah, well, that's interesting with like Venus being square Jupiter, and then also, Venus being the ruler of Mars. That I agree
Yeah,
with that delineation for sure. So I guess we can go to August,
yeah,
which is a mess.
yeah. Guess who picked the chart?
Yeah, no, you did for sure.
um, Sometimes we talk about the things that are nice, and sometimes there is a time and a place for difficult conversations to be
Yeah,
had.
yeah.
I would like to have this conversation with you right now. Oh my days, it's
Well,
so
yeah,
many
so
things.
we've got like so Jupiter is retrograde now.
Yeah,
So the support that Jupiter can offer is a little bit debilitated. What we
limited.
do have that's positive is that Mercury has picked up essential dignity. So
Mhm.
the ability to name, calculate, categorize, and this is important for being able to like have productive discussions about various issues, right? Like being able to know exactly what it is we're talking about. Of course, language is always an approximation and never precise, but when Mercury is in Virgo, there's a greater power to be able to be precise and to be clear in communication. So that's important when we're like, for all number of projects that we have in our lives, whether it's just solving problems, or you know, having political discussions or any number of things. Mercury in Virgo is strong for that. But then at the same time, you've got this retrograde Jupiter, and then you've got the Mars still in Taurus and starting to slow down. So
I really like it. I really like, I mean, I have to say, aside from everything, I really like Mercury there. I like this time period for Mercury. It's really good for Mercury stuff because it's like, it's really dignified actually. It's Virgo is the domicile of Mercury, but also the sign of its exaltation. It's away from the sun. And in some cases, this can be a bit difficult because you can have a separation between, you know, mind and soul or something. In this case, it's good, you know, because it's away from like the sun's beams. It's just like pure, raw, and afflicted Mercury stuff. I really like it. The other thing I would mention when it comes to this chart is, yeah, like obviously the like Mars-Saturn square, you know. I think that's really something to watch out for because we mentioned, you know, the Uranus-Saturn square, but this is also that's also important to note. I mean, after Mars is in Aries, it's not having a great time overall, I think, because that it transits in Taurus and there's all these difficult transits, the squares, the conjunctions, everything. It's not fun. It's also like in the beginning, like squaring the sun in Leo. So it's not great.
right. And yeah, when the sun is square Mars, it means that Mars is getting ready to station. So we're getting into slow Mars territory where like the assertive power that we have, like the ability to kind of put ourselves in compromising situations where we can succeed, is going to be challenged. You know, it's like, do you really want to put yourself in that situation? Do you really want to fight that battle? Those are the questions that I think are going to be starting to come into mind when Mars is having these difficult transits in Taurus, as it gets ready to station retrograde.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very true. And yeah, Jupiter isn't helping. On the other hand, like, yeah, Venus is having a great time because we have Mars in Taurus and then in Gemini, like retrograde. So that's more difficult for like martial stuff where we had like a great sort of impulse and great drive when Mars was co-present with the direct Jupiter in Aries. In this one, we're finding ourselves in a bit of a complicated position because first it's like in fixed Venusian sign Taurus, and then it's like in mercurial, very like precise, very analytical Gemini, and then it goes retrograde. It's very like it's not really acting out very much. Venus, on the other hand, we had like this complicated, like opposite, like these complicated like journey in Saturn, in Saturn's territory, you know, like in the beginning of the year, and now it's a bit more easy on Venus, I would say.
So in terms of people's like relationships or
yeah, definitely. I think there was a lot of reevaluation and a lot of discussion, compromise, and like really trying to accommodate difficult things and difficult people, difficult situations, and being a bit more pessimistic than usual with like earlier with the connection to Mars and Saturn. But there, you know, it's moving away from that. It learned like all the lessons he needed and everything, and now it's like we're moving forward, you know. Jupiter sort of like had his time, and now it's time for
this is definitely the time of the year where support from Jupiter is compromised, and it makes sense that happens at the same time as this difficult Mars-Saturn stuff, because if we think about the Mars-Saturn-Uranus stuff in terms of like the frictions of social change or like the difficulties in manifesting the changes that are sought, then, you know, what is required for those things to take place is like social accord or like believing in the same thing. And here we see a retrograde Jupiter in Aries, where it's like, well, maybe we realize that we have very different viewpoints on something, and they're all very individual and like from our own individual perspective, like that Aries energy. And so it makes sense that this period becomes very difficult.
So yeah, my advice to people would be that, especially like in the where Taurus and Aquarius are going to be in their charts, things might be a little more tense, especially in the month of July. Stay off social media. I'll repeat it. Stay off social media, please, for the love of God. Like, don't start anything because it's not going to lead anywhere. It's not that you shouldn't have important conversations. It's just not the right time for it. But I feel like you could tap into like more, especially with the one we showed, like with the Cancer moon and everything.
Yeah.
With more rest and more peace. And I can enjoy like there's this building up, this square that's kind of difficult. So it's gonna be like the more like difficult months of the year.
Totally.
So
yeah, and showing here that full moon, which is conjunct Saturn. So we have a full moon in Aquarius conjunct Saturn and square Mars, and it's like, this is one of those heavy hitting lunations that is not going to be fun. But in terms of like Jupiter, like maybe there's some kind of reevaluation of personal philosophies, or like how one's personal experiences contribute to one's perspectives, and like going back over those experiences, or like recontextualizing your experiences in order to come to more balanced beliefs and philosophies about the way the world works.
That lunation is especially strong because like you do have like full moon. It's like moon Saturn aspects have a reputation for being very difficult. Like they're definitely, you're more likely to be like more depressed or not feeling great, and it's especially because like it's happening at the bendings of the nodes. So as you mentioned, like so it's forming like this like grand cross sort of situation where things are tense. You have a lot on your plate, and to me it represents like this strong like battle almost of like not necessarily like egos, but like it can be a strong clash where it's in fixed signs. So like people are really determined to like stay like set on their positions, and I think the later aspects are gonna like come and shake all of that a bit.
Yeah, I think this goes back to like the theme of like backlash and whiplash, like whiplash leading to backlash. It's like these things are happening too fast. We have to go back to the past, or we have to go back to some more kind of I mean, it definitely makes me think of like fascism and like I don't know, it's not my favorite time. And this is going to be leading up, at least in the United States, to the elections in August, and we're not there yet, but let's hop forward to, or excuse me, in November. Let's hop forward to September because we have a ways to go. So here we have this Libra new moon in the rising sign. Venus is in Virgo conjunct to Mercury retrograde, and we do now have Mars in Gemini getting ready to slow down. So yeah, I mean, this period to me feels like this is really about the Mars getting slow at this point, and it's kind of like I wouldn't call it the calm before the storm necessarily, but it's like there's an impending conflict. Like, do you know what I mean?
I think it really makes me think of like when I look at this, it's like people having a sense of things are not working as they should. Things are mismatched. We have a fallen Venus, we have a fallen Sun. Mercury's there, but it's retrograde. Mars is getting ready, as you said, to station retrograde. Everything is fucking like retrograde, but like not in a great position. And I think to me it really makes me think of okay, but with these with everything like in a lot of things in Libra, And then Mars in Gemini, Saturn in Aquarius, we have a sign-based like grand trine sort of. And so like planets are speaking to each other in terms of trine. And so to me, it's like a temporary dysfunctional balance, you know, like as you said, calm before the storm, as in everyone knows things are mismatched. There is frustration, especially as Pluto is like there still in Capricorn. So yeah, things aren't great, things aren't working, we know it. And like
yeah
yeah,
I feel like we were way more optimistic about like the spring, and so just to kind of zoom out for a second, it's like you know, Jupiter goes into Pisces at the beginning of the year, and we have like the finishing up of like the Venus Mars stuff. And even though there's the Saturn Uranus sort of chaos at the beginning of the year, while those two are still close, and it gets reactivated by the Aquarius transits in April or in February and March, like the beginning, like April and May and even June, there's definitely a sense of hope during that time. And I think that the summer is going to feel a little bit like the rug getting pulled out.
like sobering up
Yeah,
with the Neptunian.
right. Yeah, sobering
Thankfully.
up, and also like some rude awakenings. Like when we
Yeah.
do have that Mars and Taurus transit, I wouldn't be surprised by like natural disasters during that Mars Uranus conjunction. And like a slow institutional response to natural disasters, like because of the stationary Saturn, or not stationary, but very slow Saturn in those previous months. And then like once we get to September, it does feel like there's just not a lot happening. Like when I look at in terms of like Venus, what we see with Venus, Mercury, and the Sun and Jupiter, like there's not a lot of like really prominent activity, it looks like to me, with
Yeah.
these things. But we do have the Saturn Uranus square still kicking in, and we do have
Yeah.
Mars getting ready to slow down. So it's like this, I think this will end up feeling like somewhat of a pause, but it's like an anxious pause.
Yeah. I don't want to be I definitely don't want to be too like dramatic or anything, but I was looking at the chart of they have a time chart for like when France entered World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And there was basically I think it was like a fallen like Virgo Venus, and it
Mm-hmm.
was ruling that Saturn, it's Saturn Taurus, like Taurus Saturn.
Okay.
And then there was like a Capricorn Mars actually, and Jupiter was also like not in great shape. I
Mm-hmm.
think it was in Aries. And it's definitely these times where like, okay, who has the power, you know, who is kind of messy. And so in this situation, we're kind of going back to like Saturn being like the most dignified planet again, as we had. And so as you said, I think it's really accurate to say we're having a brutal end to
Mm-hmm.
like illusions. Also, yeah, same. Don't want to be too dramatic, but Mars in Gemini, like since Gemini rules like the lungs and everything, it's like it makes me think of like respiratory diseases and that kind of things,
Mm-hmm.
definitely. So we could like, I don't know, have a variant
Well, yeah, I
or
mean that's
something.
interesting, because like as we sort of scoot forward into um, October, Mars
Mm.
is almost stationary by this point in late October. So we've got here the Scorpio new moon.
Yeah.
Venus is also in Scorpio, and this is an eclipse. So we have eclipse
Yeah.
season in Mars ruled
Yeah.
signs when
Mm-hmm.
Mars is getting ready to station retrograde. So um,
Yeah.
yeah. My God.
um,
It is difficult to kind of describe this level of drama. I mean, it's not like we haven't had dramatic things before, but
we're gonna die. Nah. Nah. Nah,
Hmm.
I definitely I am reminded of the humor of Saturn in potentially difficult situations,
Right.
which I think we're gonna use a lot of. But yeah, like
Hmm.
that's such an emo like eclipse.
Yeah, totally. And I guess like so one way to go with this is that, okay, Saturn has recently stationed direct. So institutional responses, like social organizations around issues, especially like through established means, is empowered at this point.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, Uranus is retrograde on the North Node. And I think what you said earlier when you were just joking, like, we're going to die. Like, it's just so funny because this chart has like Mars ruling the ascendant in the 8th house in Gemini. And it's like, maybe there is some level of like dark humor with Mars retrograding in Gemini and like making this aspect to Saturn as well, where like, oh, like we're fucked, like, and whatever situation that relates to, whether it's like some development with COVID or some other thing that we can't quite foresee, it's like, at what point does the humor turn into action, or in what ways is the dark humor like a necessary first response to like numbing the pain? And then when does it actually lead to action, or does it, you know, like for some people it will, for some people it won't. And you know, like with Mars and Gemini, I think there's a scattered quality to it, and when it's retrograde, I could see it kind of being like a flurry of ideas that aren't refined or like need to be refined. And so during this period of, you know, the Mars station, I think we'll start to see a lot of loud opinions that need to be rethought.
Loud and wrong.
Loud and wrong.
I'm thinking of the one aspect I actually like is that as Mars like goes, you know, retrograde through Gemini, is going to form a trine aspect to Saturn. And so there is this element of revisiting, to me, true and tested means of fighting back or acting, I would say. I think we could also see potentially like even like, sadly, like maybe a move back to conservatism, like, you know, make it great again, like, oh, but this is how things have always worked. And especially we mentioned like the fast action of like the nodes, and so with this eclipse happening in a Mars sign, it's like maybe people getting kind of scared of like the new ideas or like the things that have been done and tried, and like this need to go back to the so-called true and tested means of action that are already established. Maybe reacting to this like Saturn Uranus thing that increases like the brutality and the sudden aspect of things.
Yeah, well, I think that there's some kind of I think the Saturn Uranus energy is kind of like a temporal distortion in a way. Like it makes old things seem new and new things seem old. Like it's difficult to, like, in terms of what you're saying about like tested me, or, you know, going back to old ways. I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of Mars going retrograde in Gemini, like going back to old ideas about how to fight, or like issues with information or issues with journalism. But I'm not, I don't know, I'm not convinced that this is like, there's something weird about Saturn Uranus in terms of this temporal distortion. And I think that we're going to see it around the elections in the US, where there might be like a revival of some really like kind of scary ideologies. And I think that, you know, as we move into the Mars retrograde in Gemini, it's going to be a lot about like deconstructing those ideas. And maybe the trine to Saturn helps us understand how those things are inherited from the past, and gives us a better sense that, okay, like this isn't just the new cool thing, this is actually something that is very historical and has deep roots, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree. That's very interesting. Well, yeah, so have your energy going into that, especially if you have like fixed placements, so in Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius at 1 degree Scorpio, or like all the things that are happening in fixed signs. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Oh my God. I'm just thinking about this, how this transit is like in my chart, and I'm not excited.
Oh my days, yeah.
Okay, so on to November.
And it's actually like the like my nodal square too.
Oh.
So that's interesting.
Okay, so for this one we have yes, a Sagittarius new moon, not an eclipse. Thank God, finally. Jupiter in Pisces in the first, and then we've got Mars retrograde on the IC. So lots of interest. You picked this one. So what was going through your mind when you looked at this?
Party.
Oh my God, like a very loud and obnoxious house party.
That was so chaotic. The show is extremely chaotic. I'm fascinated. So we do have this what I found interesting about, like, I put like the ascendant on like in Pisces just as a like principle, but there is a lot of mutable energy that's going on. That's, I mean, 2022 in general was like quite a blast, especially the first part for mutable people with mutable placements. Um, it's definitely a more like fun, lighthearted energy. Um, but with this one, there is like the tense sort of like activity. So on the one hand, we do have like this first new moon that's not like an eclipse, which is very refreshing, definitely. Because like we've had like a year and a half, 2 years of like the nodes transiting in Gemini, in the Gemini Sagittarius axis, which was a lot. But like I feel like this, we're kind of moving away from the heaviness, I think. Jupiter is back in Pisces and direct for a short while, but still, I think that's quite encouraging. We do have this Gemini Mars that's retrograde, and so planets will come to cross and like make an opposition to it, like literally one after another. But I think the first part of the transit, as we have there, is going to be more fun. I actually look forward to it. So yeah,
Okay.
it's very chaotic, as mutable signs know how to be. But I do appreciate it overall. I am, and like, and we're back with the good old Neptunian things, you know. So I think it's maybe gonna, I do like the quality it has of reflecting back on maybe the possible illusions of like the earlier during the year, but with a new attitude, a sort of like fresh outlook, and a sort of like filter, a testing filter that is retrograde Mars to test it out, I would say.
Yeah, that's interesting about like, yeah, Mars retrograde being sort of about testing in a way, or I think it's like Mars retrograde figures out what doesn't work and stops doing it, or has to find a different way to do it. And I think that can be, it's always a really necessary process, right? Like just like every retrograde is part of the planet's cycle, it's like a necessary part of our experience. One of the ways that I like to, visualize Mars retrograde is that when Mars is retrograde, it's a bright ass red star that rises in the east as the sun sets. And so all night we have this bright red star in the sky. And so our attention is really focused on conflict during Mars retrogrades.
Yeah.
And a lot of that conflict is, it needs to be had. But then there's other conflicts that I think part of the process of Mars retrograde is about realizing like, this is not the fight to fight. This is not like, I'm tired. Like my energy cannot be spent on this fight. It needs to be spent on this fight. And maybe that fight that you do choose is the one that is like more personal, or maybe it's the one that's more social and collective, or maybe those maybe the personal things that you choose to devote your energy to are contributing to some kind of collective goals that you want. like
It
bridging the
makes
sort of
me
the
think
personal and social. Yeah.
yeah, like it, especially you're saying that it makes a lot of sense, especially with Mercury and Sagittarius.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
You're such a downer on Jupiter ruled Mercury. I don't get it.
No, that's actually not true because I love Pisces Mercury.
Okay.
And I think and I think we talked about that actually. I really love Pisces Mercury. It's quite ethereal. So sort of it has this quality of like a midsummer night's dream, sort of a whimsical just for the sake of being whimsical. I really like. But like Sagittarius Mercury is just loud and wrong for the sake of it. Like,
well, I mean, especially during this Mars.
I was good. It's with the opposition to Mars. It's just like, yeah, fuck you, and like just saying it. Like I know, when you talk to people who have like so much stamina to be wrong, and like you just have to give up, not because you're wrong, and they're like, ha, see, I was right, and you're like, shut the fuck up.
Maybe Mars retrograde in Gemini is like running out of stamina to be wrong.
Let's hope so.
I'm too tired. But literally, that could be a thing. Like, I'm literally too tired to keep having these opinions. Like, I don't even know if these opinions are true. So why don't I just stop fucking having them?
Yeah, it's like it's like when you're talking and like the metaphorical like speech hill you're willing to die on, but literally dying on it. Like, I'm too tired. You know what? You can have my body. Like,
well, yeah, like I will die on this hill is usually something that people mean metaphorically, but like, what if this hill is actually like killing you? Like what if being this ideologically committed to something is actually really draining in a dangerous way for yourself?
What if it's actually not good for you to be talking all the time? Have you considered that?
I mean, yeah, like an information cleanse is definitely in order for Mars retrograde in Gemini, I think. Like having a healthy or like purging the informational diet of shitty foods, which is to say shitty sources of information or shitty habits of information. Like, where do you, like, if you just scroll, I mean, think about this for myself all the time, like nothing that sophisticated happens on Twitter, like nothing that like interesting happens on Twitter, nothing like, I mean, there are like threads, right? But for the most part, when you're scrolling, you're seeing like inane, like, it is the hive mind. And I think that like this, it's, for me personally, like, I think Mars retrograde in Gemini, like what is making me feel right now is this like frustration that nobody gets it, or like nobody gets how I see it. And maybe the need to just like unplug in order to, figure out how you do see it, like, or come to terms with the fact that it's okay for other people to see it different ways. I don't know. Some feelings.
No, you're very right. I think especially makes sense to talk about like social media and stuff like that, because I've seen people get increasingly frustrated with social media, all social media, or like being like, I want to find like, and maybe Mars retrograde is about that too. Like you mentioned, finding different paths. Maybe this one is about finding different routes because the one is so frustrating. I think it's interesting that you also use the metaphor of food, because the issue I think that people increasingly have with social media is that there's nothing of substance. And everything is kind of fake, and you don't feel like you're kind of going anywhere or making any type of progress, or like progress is just in vain, because as soon as you're doing that, it's like every type of discourse that happens on social media, and yet it did shape a lot of thoughts, but I feel like it's kind of like people have outgrown the way we use social media. And I think it's especially interesting to talk about like growing and like developing when we talk about Mars, like growing pains, and that one is maybe finding new roots. And Mercury in this position just finds like himself like at odds, you know, with this outmoded kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting in terms of like, you know, we still have the Saturn Uranus thing going on where like one way to think about the Uranus and Taurus is also through like presence and like physical presence, that like, so it's Venus ruled, so it's about like social things or like connective experiences socially. And then you have Uranus, and when Uranus like the first Saturn Uranus square in Taurus and Aquarius was like during the beginning of the pandemic, where all of a sudden it's like, oh, now we have this blockages to like connecting, but we also have these weird innovative ways of connecting, like Zoom and stuff. And I think this is maybe a theme for this year, and like wrapping up for the Uranus or for the Mars retrograde is like we've now seen a lot of possibilities for how the new world could be ordered. And it's like, okay, now you have to choose, like you have to choose a path. I think like the adventures have been kind of, we've seen some of the potentials, and now like the Mars retrograde is like refining the selection of like which of these multiple mutable options do we want to pick. And it's going to look different for everybody.
Yeah, and like it's all these different influences, right? Because we do have, again, like Venus in Sagittarius that's squaring, it's opposing like Mars, and it's squaring Jupiter. And as you said, like it's like this it's like this T square of like impossible choice almost. That's very interesting. But yeah, I think it's gonna be, as you said, I think it's gonna be more, maybe a bit more refined. I think it's like August, September, October to some extent. It's more like brutal. It's more like in your face. That one is more like, what now? What do we do now?
Yeah, and like with the word refinement, like nobody starts out refined. One becomes refined through like, you know, a slow process of like whittling away the imperfections, I guess. And it's sort of like grinding a sword on a stone, you know, it takes time.
We're all diamonds.
Sure, yeah, you know, like we're just using words here, but yeah, like the Mars refining our social skills is one way to maybe think about the Mars retrograde in Gemini. And it definitely is not refined to start out, but the process of the retrograde is like one of refinement. And I think it is like about, you know, word choice and communication and, you know, information and journalism, and like how can journalism and reporting and the streams of information with which we make judgments, how can those like support not just accuracy, but like, I don't know, there's something about this feels kind of like the sky is falling, like Mars retrograde in Gemini, like, oh my God, there's all this shit happening. And it makes me think of like, if you get really into a world of like podcasts where everybody has the same, you know, sort of the echo chamber of that, how it becomes really easy to start thinking that the world is ending. And there are important interventions that have been made by others, like Adrienne Marie Brown as one example. Like, you know, her podcast is called, her and her sister's podcast is called like How to Survive the End of the World. And it's like, yeah, the world is already like this idea that things are going to be bad is part of the problem. Like things already are bad. Stop like trying to predict badness and just like admit that things are shit now. And what do we do about it? What do we do about it? It's like, I think Mars retrograde is like trying to get us to do something about it instead of just continuing to catastrophize. Yeah.
How can you pour like buckets of water in hell, and how effective is that? That's like Pisces Jupiter.
Pouring buckets of water into hell, 2022.
I think, but I think it's gonna be more than buckets of water though. It's like like with stuff of extremes, like um but I'm also reminded of, I'm thinking of like, how do we move into Sagittarius Gemini axis after the nodes have moved?
Yes.
And to me, it's very much like there's maybe going to be like a contrast with how we were used to like processing information, and that kind of, or like get frustrated at how we process information, that we've experienced a lot. And it's like things are different now because we've received a lot of information. People are definitely more and more aware of like things like fake news, or that people are questioning, you know, with the, especially Gemini Sagittarius is very like scientific understanding of things, and how people are like constantly putting into question like scientific findings, or like, you know, I'm thinking of vaccines and everything, and like this time it's like, no, shut up, get vaccinated. Like, you know, like I think it's, yeah,
Yeah, no, I mean,
revisiting
I think
what we make.
that's all important. Like the Gemini-Sag axis, like when the nodes, I think what you're alluding to is like when the nodes were there, that was like when we got the vaccine, and when we got like the denialism around the vaccine, or like when we knew that COVID was real, but then people were like, oh no, COVID's not real, or like, oh, COVID was like invented in China, or like all this stuff. And like the mistrust of information, I think that like mistrust is a nodal phenomenon because it's about obstruction of light, obstruction of truth. And so as the nodes are no longer in those signs, then it's like there is more clarity. But with the Mars retrograde in Gemini, it's like another sort of that's not so dissimilar from like the nodal energy, except maybe this time it's a little bit more violent, perhaps. It's like more of a violent disagreement around, you know, vaccines or science or knowledge in general. I also know that, or one way I've thought about the Gemini-Sag eclipses in the astrology community is like the student-teacher relationships for sure, or like even mediated student-teacher relationships, in the sense that, like, you know, if you have a podcast that everybody listens to, or other sort of sources of information like conferences where there's like this, you know, accumulated Jupiterian well of knowledge, and then you have the Gemini side of it where you have like people absorbing the knowledge and like communicating and like chatting about everything. I think that like the dynamics in the astrology community during the nodes in Sag and Gemini were very combative, you know, like there was a lot of friction between like generations in particular. Like the older generation of astrologers, largely looking at the younger people like we're all out to cancel them, and like that being a prominent phenomenon in our community at this point. And I think that as the nodes move out, or they have moved out, and as we do start to have in-person conferences again, I think that that's going to mellow out quite a bit, because then we're no longer just people behind screens.
Yeah.
And the fact that Jupiter will have dignity. I mean, I remember my first astrology conference was in 2019 at NORWAC, and that was when Jupiter was in Sag. And
that's so sweet.
Yeah, it was incredible. And I just like, you know, it was amazing to feel like, you know, there are people out there who know what I know and more, and we can share and we can dialogue about this stuff. But I think with the Capricorn and Aquarius story of Jupiter, I think it's definitely not been my experience so much anymore. It's been much more, I don't know. Yeah, the walls have been more difficult to penetrate for sure. But I think we're kind of looking forward to something else.
Definitely.
Do you want to say anything else about like November?
I don't think so. More in general, I was going to say something about the nodes, but I think we can.
Oh yeah, go for it.
I was just going to say that it makes me think about something more fundamental with the nodes moving in Taurus and Scorpio, especially with like nourishment, reproduction, these very things like that are stuff. Yeah, primordial was the one I was looking for, as in what I feel like when we have transits to these places, it's also like what is fundamental, what is core to my survival. You know, the moon has her exaltation in Taurus, and it's this very thing of like, what makes me feel secure, what and are we secure? And then I think with the eclipse, people are like, shit, I don't think we are actually, guys. Things are kind of like in shambles right now. And like how we go about that. And I do, and I think the Mars, Uranus, Saturn, and these signs emphasize like these insecurities, you know, and this lack of possibility, like to be vulnerable.
What do you
And
mean?
how
Can you say what you mean by that?
I'm thinking, for example, and it's funny because you mentioned like the positive qualities of masculinity being highlighted in the sign of Aries, and I'm thinking that, you know, for some years now there's been these conversations happening about toxic masculinity and how men can go about being more vulnerable, and how as a society we enable various people to play around with all of that. And I'm also thinking, for example, some people in society, like women, for example, have been really pushed to take like the burden of care to an extent that's not sustainable. And I think with the nodes in these signs, we're really looking at, in all sorts of ways, what is sustainable and what isn't, you know. And with the South Node in Scorpio, it's like what needs to decay in order to cultivate something that's more sustainable.
Yeah,
definitely.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think that the nodes in Taurus and Scorpio so you had mentioned. Oh, another thing about that I was thinking about is, I mean, you mentioned survival as one of the themes of this axis. And I'm curious, with Uranus being on the North Node, if there is like a hunger for everlasting life, and in the sense of like anti-aging technology being more popular or gaining popularity, whether that's through like medical means or if there's other kinds of technological interventions in the body, you know, Taurus being the exaltation of the moon. So yeah, that's something that just to throw in there with like the reproductive stuff, with you know, using this axis to sort of think through gender transformations or shifts in gender discourse over the next year, but also you know, living and dying. Like what if the South Node in Scorpio is also about releasing the fear of death?
Dying properly. I think dying with dignity and like unconventional ways, like to age. Maybe we're gonna see, like, I don't know, older actors also, or like really young, like child actors too, like this, like as you said, like anti-aging. I think it can be like this sort of play around age. I like that the Uranus and North Node in Taurus, you know. I think it could be something along the lines of, especially as you mentioned, you know, because it's squaring like Saturn the whole time. I think maybe it could be something like discovering things, or like using things that were previously considered like unconventional in terms like foods, or like sustainability things, or like cultivation, you know, agriculture, all these things.
Well, yeah. And I mean,
it could also be like,
what you said, like dying properly, language that I like around that also is like dying well, and that one way to die well is to die on time, you know, like in terms of like the connection between human and non-human life, between like civilization and nature, to the extent that we can separate those. But like having the North Node in Taurus, maybe there's a realization that like the earth and nature are like exhausted by human existence, and that accepting death on a certain clock is actually part of what it means to live well. Like that dying well is also part of living well.
Absolutely. That makes so much sense. I'm also thinking of a we mentioned reproduction, that kind of things. And also I'm thinking like the whole attitude towards sex. And I've seen that, I mean the early 2000s and stuff like that were like the age of like the development of like porno chic and that kind of like aesthetic. And I've seen one where people like express like concerns around like so-called like hypersexuality, or maybe like the display of naked bodies or like of sexuality in a way that's like degrading and humiliating, or and these like roles of like power and balance on the nodes. I would definitely say that there is this whole thing around sex and purity, or like maybe people being like, there's been this whole thing, I think, with like the sexual liberation and everything of, wow, like women can actually have more sexual autonomy and that kind of things. And I would not be surprised if like this year, especially with the squares and everything and the whole like things like gender roles, we were revisiting something like, actually, I don't feel very empowered in these situations. I know it definitely happened to me too, and to other people. And I think for women, like especially like who have sex with men, it's definitely something like there is a strong like power imbalance and a issue of like domination of like masculinity being used as like a weapon almost to make yourself feel like this need to like degrade your partner in order to feel like empowered. And I wouldn't be surprised if like maybe we revisited that, but it's also on the more like practical level. Some people started being like, yeah, like we need to, it's gone too far, like it's not actual empowerment, so like I'm gonna stop having sex. I think because like Scorpio as a sign does have a strong tie also to like abstinence and that kind of things, I think. And so especially with the South Node there, I think we could see that kind of these kind of scenarios.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think about what I would say about the nodes and sex, but nothing is coming to mind. So maybe we can just go to
December.
Yes, our final hurrah. So basically what has happened is that, Jupiter is at the last degree of Pisces. Mars is more than halfway through its retrograde, as it has opposed the sun at this point already. Mercury is in Capricorn, and yeah, so I guess December, it's no longer eclipse season. So it's sort of like the eclipse season hangover. Usually eclipse season is pretty dynamic for people. A lot of things happen. And then the month after that, it can be like, adjusting to the changes, and starting to bring those eclipse beginnings, into like practicing them more. And like, eclipses are 6-month windows. Basically, it's like you have the eclipse, but then you have this 6-month window after the eclipse, during which the themes of that eclipse are still like in motion. And so that's how I would, just start with like the Sag season after the Scorpio Taurus eclipses is starting there. What else do you think about this?
I think I picked this chart because of like the moon enclosure also.
Totally.
I found it quite interesting at the last degree of mutable signs. Yeah. And so we had this really tense situation we were looking at right before, and then this one, it's more like, okay guys, let's bring in like some fun. So like while it feels like you have guests over that you have a lot of fun with, like really good friends, and then they're staying at your place for a couple of days and then they're leaving, and it's like the last night, like the last party sort of before they leave. And there is that element of like heaviness of like, oh no, like what am I gonna do with my life? But it's that one of like, well, so we had a good time. same. It feels good to have these lunations and these things that are like averse to the nodes, you know,
Right.
with like the moon, Jupiter, Venus there.
Yeah.
It's still not like, yeah.
Oh, I just think it'll be a nicer, like, sort of holiday season than this year, maybe.
And I do like, because like this month, I mean, like last month, it was like so not shocking to have things like restrictions pile up again, as like the square, like the Uranus Saturn square was starting up. It was like clockwork. But that one seems nicer. I also do like the Mercury and Capricorn thing.
One of my favorite placements.
It is really nice, and we do have this it's not conjunct Pluto or anything yet, and it's like this like mutable goodness before Venus and Jupiter ingress, and yet we also have like the more practical, like goal-oriented Mercury that's like, no guys, like we are actually being realistic this time. We can realistically have a good time.
Yeah, I think Mercury might even get into Aquarius by the end of the year. I think it does. Oh, no, it goes retrograde. Okay. Yeah, so it goes retrograde on the 29th, conjunct Venus. So it's interesting how like this sort of reactivates the current Venus retrograde in a way. So yeah, I mean,
and like the Venus, Mercury, Pluto like climate that we've had lately.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so kind of coming full circle there. I guess it'll be nice to have, you know, this final hurrah of Jupiter in Pisces, because it is the last time that Jupiter will have major essential dignity until it's in Cancer in several years. So it's good to soak that up in terms of belief.
This is such a good metaphor.
Yeah.
Pisces Jupiter.
Yeah, soak it up. I mean, Jupiter is sponge-like anyway. Like it wants to absorb, you know, it wants to experience. And so going through the transit of Jupiter in Pisces like a sponge, I think is a very, a good use of that time. And it's also a good use of that time if what you soak up, like what watery environments do you find yourself in? What emotional spaces do you find yourself in that you want to soak up? And what are the ones that you don't want to soak up, and just don't be around those so much. And one other thing about Jupiter in Pisces is that I think that especially this very end of Pisces, like this is during hurricane season. And so with Jupiter being the ruler of storms and being in its domicile in these sort of malefic degrees of Pisces, I wouldn't be surprised if this is like a bad hurricane season in 2022. So that's like, I'm not super into weather prediction, but that's just something that kind of seems relevant, especially in the context of like a Uranus and Taurus transit.
That's interesting. I can't say so much because like we do have a very even climate where I live.
Yeah.
There's no earthquakes, there's no hurricanes, there's like the weather's just pretty bad most times. That's it.
I know, but I was in Paris for like 2 months once, but yeah, it's not the most enjoyable. It was like October to December.
Oh yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's so
like gray.
For some reason though, I lived in London, which is like known to be a bit colder, which I don't find true, but which is definitely known to be like at least as bad weather. But for some reason, I've always felt better spending the fall, like the autumn in London rather than in Paris. I'm curious though about, I'd love to look at it again, but back in the beginning of the century, we had something called the Creux de la Seine, which is when the Seine River that flows in Paris like overflows basically, and that's when usually it's during the winter when there's like heavy rain, like so much that like you would see videos of like people walking like in the water. Like back in the day, it was early 20th century, so it was like these elegant women who would like pay these like strong men to like carry them over the water.
I love that. I want to go back.
Yeah. And so I'd love to look at the transits of that time, you know, because like I could definitely see like storms or like a lot of water with Jupiter, but I can't wait to be like crying in the sea as, as a Jupiter.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, weather
reproduction.
prediction is like sort of a lost art in astrology. It was actually a huge part of the astrological tradition, like all the way back to Ptolemy and before. But because of, you know, meteorology being a thing,
Yeah,
you know, they're wrong a lot. So I don't know. Like, I feel like, you know, there are techniques for it. Actually, in Ptolemy and in even like Renaissance sources. I mean, it was important for like agriculture, just being able to predict weather and like almanacs and all of that. So I feel like we should maybe bring that back. I'd definitely be interested.
To get shouted at by skeptics.
I know, right?
You're like,
but
it's
hey, like,
so unscientific.
I know, but that's just what people say when it's like, people say that something is unscientific and then they know nothing about it. I mean, that's kind of the whole skepticism conversation of lately. It's like, actually, our systems in astrology are highly technical. And well, some more than others. But I think that I think I should shut up before I say something to piss somebody off.
Wait, I think my screen is frozen, or like, can you see me?
Yeah, you're good. You're good. You're all good.
Okay, good. Because like it's frozen on my screen, so I'm like, am I frozen? But yeah, I do. So like in conclusion of that, I think I do look forward to like a more okay-ish month of December next year.
Yeah, totally.
I could say that. And I find the beginning of this year, like as we're heading into 2022, very exciting actually. And I am excited about Mars and Venus and Capricorn. I'm one of those people. But yeah, it's definitely cool to like the summer less, but still, and lots of wonderful things. Let's see whatever prediction come true.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, maybe we'll clip this up, but yeah, thank you so much, Héloïse, for joining me, and we'll have to have you back for sure. Is there anything that you would like to let the audience know about where to find you, how to work with you, and all of that? Yeah,
sure. So I have a website. It's called Hello Astro, just like my name with one L. That's spelled HELOASTRO. That's also what I go by on Twitter and Instagram, where you can also find me. Don't try and search this on TikTok, please. I'm still setting it up. But yeah, I mean, thank you so much, Drew, for having me. It was really a pleasure. And I look forward to this new astro year with you.
Yeah, you too. Well, thank you so much. And yeah, everybody like comment, like, subscribe with you know, your thoughts for 2022, anything that you heard from here that you would like to hear more about. Maybe we can have Héloïse back to dive into some stuff some more. So yeah, definitely like, comment, and subscribe your thoughts so we can keep the conversation going. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.